Step into the quiet corners of ancient Greece where the myths of Hera, Odysseus, Medusa, Cronus, Hestia, Athena, and Poseidon breathe life into the daily routines of ordinary people. From the hearth's glow to the sea's restless tides, these stories unravel the mundane rituals, marriage laws, trade, farming, weaving, fishing that wove the fabric of the polis, revealing the unsung heroes who defied gods and time to build a world that still echoes in our own. The Oracle of Delphi, whispers of fate in stone and smoke ears. You settle into the quiet folds of ancient Greece. Imagine yourself walking the rugged paths of Mount Parnassus, where the air carries the faint scent of laurel leaves and distant olive groves. This is the world of the Oracle of Delphi, a place where the gods' gloomy craft unfolded not in dramatic thunderclaps, but in the slow, deliberate rituals of everyday consultation. Founded around the 8th century BCE, Delphi wasn't just a mythological hub. It was a historical sanctuary that influenced decisions across the Mediterranean for over a millennium. You can picture the pilgrims, farmers from Thessaly, merchants from Corinth, even kings from distant Lydia trudging up the sacred way, their sandals kicking up dust from the well-worn stones. Each step was a reminder of human frailty as they sought answers from Pythia, the oracle's priestess, whose prophecies emerged from a chasm in the earth, shrouded in vapors that modern historians debate as ethylene gas seeping from geological faults. In those early days, Delphi's origins tied back to the Bronze Age, when the site was likely a simple earth goddess shrine, perhaps dedicated to Gaia. Archaeological digs in the 19th and 20th centuries uncovered layers of Mycenaean pottery and figurines, hinting at a continuity from prehistoric worship to the classical era. By the time of Homer's epics, around 750 BCE, Apollo had supplanted the older deities, claiming the oracle through myth, slaying the serpent Python and establishing his temple. But peel away the legend, and you find a practical institution. The sanctuary grew into a Panhellenic center, funded by tithes from city-states and spoils of war. You might envision the treasuries lining the path, small, sturdy buildings erected by Athens, Siphanos, and others, each a testament to political maneuvering disguised as piety. These structures housed votive offerings, bronze tripods, golden statues, and inscribed stones that recorded victories and alliances, all under the watchful eye of the Amphictyonic League, a council of neighboring tribes that managed the site. Like an ancient bureaucracy, daily life at Delphi revolved around meticulous preparations. The Pythia, chosen from local women over 50, lived a life of seclusion in a modest house near the temple. Before consultations, which occurred only 9 days a year on the 7th day after the new moon, she fasted and bathed in the Costolian spring, its waters believed to purify and inspire. Attendants, known as hosioi, assisted her, chewing laurel leaves to invoke Apollo's spirit. As you imagine sitting in the adyton, the inner chamber, the air thick with incense from burning barley and hemp, the Pythia's trance begins. Her utterances garbled, ecstatic, were interpreted by male priests, the propheti, who versified them into hexameters. This process wasn't divine magic, but a craft honed over generations, blending psychological insight with ambiguous phrasing that allowed for multiple outcomes. Historical records, like those from Herodotus, show how these prophecies guided real events. Croesus of Lydia consulted the oracle before his ill-fated war with Persia in 546 BCE, receiving the cryptic advice that invading would destroy a great empire, his own, as it turned out. Yet, beneath this veneer of divine intervention lay the shadow of moral order's fragility. The oracle's responses often enforced a gloomy conservatism, warning against hubris and promoting adherence to traditional mores in times of crisis, such as the Persian invasions of 490 and for 80 BCE. Delphi's advice swayed city-states toward unity or surrender. Athens, for instance, was told to trust in wooden walls, interpreted as their navy, leading to the pivotal Battle of Salamis. But not all consultations were grand. Many involved mundane disputes over land boundaries, marriage, alliances, or colony foundations. Excavations reveal inscriptions from the 6th century BC onward, detailing queries about crop failures or inheritance laws, where the gods' ploys seemed to favor the status quo, reinforcing social hierarchies in a world of slaves. Metics and citizens dot as the sun dips behind Parnassus, casting long shadows over the temple ruins. You wonder if these whispers from the earth shaped empires and ordinary lives alike. What hidden strategies did the priests employ to maintain their influence, and how did one fateful prophecy unravel it all? As you linger in the shadow of Delphi's ancient stones, the air feels heavier, charged with the weight of countless decisions shaped by the oracle's cryptic words. The sanctuary, perched on Mount Parnassus, was more than a spiritual hub. It was a nexus of power, where the gods' gloomy craft intertwined with human ambition. By the 6th century BCE, Delphi had grown into a sophisticated institution, its influence rooted in the interplay of ritual, politics, and economics. You can imagine the steady stream of pilgrims, some barefoot, others in fine linen clutching offerings of livestock or precious metals, their questions etched on lead tablets, later found by archaeologists. These tablets, dating from the 5th to 3rd centuries BCE, reveal the mundane pulse of life: a farmer asking if his harvest would recover, a trader seeking safe passage across the Aegean, or a woman wondering if her child would survive a fever. The oracle's responses, preserved in fragments, were rarely direct. Cloaked in riddles that left room for hope or dread, the Pythia's role was central, yet her life was one of quiet sacrifice. Historical accounts, like those from Diodorus Siculus, describe her as a local woman, often uneducated, chosen for her purity rather than status. You might picture her, draped in white, seated on a bronze tripod above the chasm in the temple's Adyton, the vapors rising from the earth, possibly ethylene, as geologists propose induced a trance. Her words tumbling out in a disjointed stream. The priests, trained in poetry and politics, shaped these utterances into verses that could guide or mislead. This was no divine dictation, but a human art, blending observation with ambiguity. For instance, when Athens faced Xerxes' invasion in 480 BCE, the oracle's call for wooden walls was debated fiercely. Some argued for fortifying the Acropolis, but the mysticals saw the navy as the key, a choice that saved the city at Salamis. Such moments reveal the oracle's power to sway history through interpretation, not just prophecy. Beyond the temple, Delphi was a bustling economic center. Excavations show a marketplace near the sanctuary where vendors sold votive figurines, food and wine to pilgrims. The Amphictyonic League, overseeing the site, managed vast wealth from offerings, funding festivals like the Pythian Games, which rivaled the Olympics. By the 6th century BCE. These games, held every 4 years, included chariot races, musical contests, and athletic events, drawing crowds that boosted local trade. You can envision potters and weavers crafting wares for visitors, their livelihoods tied to Apollo's cult. Yet, this prosperity masked tensions. City-states vied for influence, dedicating treasuries to outshine rivals, as seen in the Siphonian. Treasury's intricate friezes from 525 BC. The oracle's neutrality was questioned, especially when its advice favored powerful states like Sparta or Athens, hinting at political machinations behind the divine facade. The moral order upheld by the oracle often reinforced tradition over change. Prophecies warned against defying fate, as when King Croesus ignored the ambiguity of his prophecy and lost his empire. Commoners, too, faced this rigidity. Tablets show queries about runaway slaves or disputed inheritances, with answers urging obedience to social norms. Yet, cracks appeared. By the 5th century BCE, philosophers like Xenophanes criticized reliance on oracles, arguing for reason over superstition. As you stand among the ruins, the laurel-scented breeze carries a question. How did the oracle maintain its grip on a changing world? And what misstep began its slow decline? As you stand amidst the crumbling columns of Delphi's sanctuary, the faint echo of ancient chants seems to linger in the mountain air. By the 4th century BCE, the oracle of Delphi had woven itself into the fabric of Greek life, its influence stretching from the humblest farmer to the mightiest tyrant. Yet, the very mechanisms that sustained its power, ritual precision, political neutrality, and cryptic prophecies also sowed the seeds of its decline. You can imagine the scene: the Pythia, her face veiled, swaying on a tripod as priests translate her murmurs into hexameters. The pilgrims, weary from their trek up Mount Parnassus, hang on every word, seeking guidance in a world of war, plague, and uncertainty. But the oracle's resolutions, often cloaked in ambiguity, began to falter as Greece's intellectual and political landscape shifted, exposing the fragile balance of its gloomy craft. The oracle's climax came during the Persian Wars, when its pronouncements shaped survival strategies for entire city-states. In 480 BCE, Athens' decision to trust the wooden walls prophecy interpreted as their navy led to victory, at Salamis cementing Delphi's reputation. Yet, not all outcomes were so triumphant. Historical records, like those from Plutarch, reveal moments of failure. When Alexander the Great visited in 336 BCE, demanding a prophecy, the Pythia refused, citing an inauspicious day. His forceful insistence she declared him invincible showed the oracle bending under pressure, its sanctity strained by mortal power. Excavations of the site, including inscriptions from the 4th century BCE, show a decline in queries about grand state affairs, with more focus on personal matters like health or marriage, suggesting a shift in trust. The rise of rational thought, led by figures like Socrates and Plato, further eroded the oracle's authority, as Greeks began to question divine intervention in favor of human agency. By the Hellenistic period, after Alexander's death in 323 BCE, Delphi's economic and political clout waned. The sanctuary still drew pilgrims, but its treasuries, once brimming with gold, saw fewer grand dedications. The Pythian games continued, yet their prestige dimmed as new cultural centers, like Alexandria, rose. You might picture local potters and innkeepers, once thriving on pilgrim trade, now struggling as fewer visitors climbed the sacred way. The oracle's moral order, which had upheld traditional hierarchies, clashed with emerging philosophies that valued individual reason. A telling moment came in 79 BCE, when Delphi was nearly sacked by invading Gauls, though saved. The event exposed its vulnerability. By the time Rome annexed Greece in 146 BCE, the oracle was a shadow of its former self, its prophecies less. Sought as emperors like Nero looted its treasures, the final blow came with the rise of Christianity. In 391 CE, Emperor Theodosius I banned pagan practices and Delphi's temple was abandoned, its chasm silenced. Archaeological finds broken statues, scattered votive offerings paint a picture of gradual neglect. Yet, the oracle's legacy endures in how it shaped decision-making, from war strategies to daily life, revealing human resilience in seeking meaning amid uncertainty. As you gaze across the ruins, consider this: the oracle's fall reflects a broader truth. When belief systems calcify, they risk obsolescence. How does this dance between faith and skepticism echo in our modern quest for certainty, where algorithms and experts replace ancient vapors? Zeus's thunderous decrees, royal intrigues mirrored in the Skesis. You tread through the bustling agora of ancient Mycenae. The distant rumble of thunder echoes from the heavens, a sound that Greeks in the 8th century BCE would attribute to Zeus, king of the gods. His myths, woven into the fabric of daily life, were more than divine tales. They mirrored the gritty realities of royal power and intrigue in Greece's city-states. Zeus, with his thunderbolts and unyielding authority, was the divine archetype of the mortal kings who ruled from fortified citadels like Mycenae, Tiryns, and Athens. These rulers, often claiming descent from Zeus himself, used his mythology to legitimize their power, blending divine sanction with political maneuvering. You can picture the scene: a king, clad in bronze armor, standing before a stone altar, offering sacrifices to Zeus to secure favor before a campaign, while his advisors whisper of alliances and betrayals. Historical records, including linear tablets from the 14th century BCE, reveal a world where Mycenaean palaces functioned as economic and religious hubs. Kings, titled Wainacs, oversaw land distribution, trade, and religious rites. much like Zeus presiding over the Olympian order. Archaeological digs at Pylos uncover clay tablets listing offerings to Zeus grain, wine, livestock showing how his cult underpinned royal legitimacy. By the Archaic period, around 800 to 500 BCE, city-states like Sparta and Argos built temples to Zeus, their grand columns reflecting both piety and propaganda. The Zeus sanctuary at Olympia, established by the 10th century BCE, became a focal point, where rulers competed in chariot races during the Olympic Games to display wealth and divine favor. You might envision the dust rising from the racetrack, the crowd's cheers mingling with prayers to Zeus for victory. Daily life under Zeus's shadow was steeped in ritual. Commoners, from potters to shepherds, participated in festivals like the Diasia in Athens, where families offered cakes and small animals to Zeus Mylichios, the kindly god who protected households. These rites, detailed in inscriptions from the 5th century BCE, reveal a society seeking divine stability amid political turmoil. Kings, however, faced a darker reality. Myths of Zeus's punishments striking down rebels like Salmoneus with thunderbolts echoed the fate of rulers who overstepped. Historical accounts like those from Thucydides describe tyrants like Cleisthenes of Sicyon, whose reforms around 600 BCE provoked unrest, their fates seemingly cursed by divine displeasure. The gods' ploys, reflected in Zeus's myths, justified harsh royal decrees, reinforcing a moral order where loyalty to authority was paramount. Yet, this divine mirroring had cracks. The Iliad, composed around 750 BCE, portrays Zeus as a flawed ruler, swayed by gods and mortals alike, much like the kings who bickered over territory. Excavations at Mycenae reveal collapsed palaces from the 12th century BCE, hinting at internal strife or invasions that destabilized royal power. As you stand beneath a stormy sky, the weight of Zeus's mythology presses down, a symbol of order, but also of ambition's cost. How did these mortal kings navigate the tension between divine mandate and human rebellion, and what hidden intrigues threatened their thrones? The storm clouds gather thicker now, and you can almost feel the electric charge of Zeus's presence as you walk the stone-paved streets of a Greek polis in the 6th century BCE. The mythology of Zeus with his thunderous decrees was not just a divine narrative, but a framework for the political intrigues that defined royal courts. Kings and tyrants, styling themselves as Zeus's earthly counterparts, wielded power through a delicate balance of fear, loyalty, and divine endorsement. In Sparta, the dual kingship system to rulers from separate royal houses claimed descent from Zeus through the hero Heracles, as recorded in Herodotus's histories. This divine lineage justified their authority, but it also invited rivalries, as each king vied for supremacy, much like Zeus navigating the squabbles of the Olympian gods. You might picture a Spartan king, his crimson cloak billowing, consulting priests before battle, seeking Zeus's favor to outmaneuver his co-ruler. The cult of Zeus was a political tool, deeply embedded in civic life. Archaeological evidence from Olympia, including bronze votive figurines from the 8th century BCE, shows rulers dedicating lavish offerings, tripods, shields, even entire statues to curry divine favor and public support. These acts were public spectacles, as seen in the inscriptions detailing the victories of figures like King Gelon of Syracuse, who, after defeating Carthage in 480 BCE, dedicated a massive tripod to Zeus at Olympia. Such displays were not mere piety. They were calculated moves to cement alliances and intimidate rivals. You can envision the bustling festival grounds where merchants sold clay replicas of Zeus's eagle, and poets recited hymns that wove royal deeds into divine myth, blurring the line between mortal and god for ordinary Greeks. Zeus's mythology shaped their understanding of justice and hierarchy. Festivals like the Panathenaea in Athens included sacrifices to Zeus Polyius, protector of the city, where citizens, from weavers to magistrates, participated in processions described in 5th century BCE reliefs. These rituals reinforced social order, but they also highlighted tensions. Commoners burdened by taxes or conscription sometimes resented the lavish displays of rulers claiming Zeus's favor. Historical accounts, like those from Xenophon, describe uprisings against tyrants, such as the fall of the Pisistratids in Athens around 510 BCE, where divine omens, thunderstorms, or eclipses were interpreted as Zeus's disapproval. The moral order upheld by Zeus's myths, emphasizing obedience, often clashed with growing demands for democratic reforms. Yet, the shadow of Zeus's power loomed largest in times of crisis. During the Persian Wars, oracles and omens attributed to Zeus guided military strategies, as when Delphi's priests invoked his name to rally Greek unity. But these divine endorsements could backfire. Thucydides notes how leaders like Cleon, in the Peloponnesian War, manipulated religious fervor for political gain, only to face ruin when their campaigns failed. As you hear the distant thunder, a question lingers. How did these rulers balance the divine aura of Zeus with the gritty realities of betrayal and ambition? And what misstep tipped the scales toward their downfall? The storm breaks over the citadel, and you stand in the rain-soaked courtyard of a Greek city-state in the 5th century BCE, where Zeus's thunderous decrees resonate in both myth and mortal strife. The mythology of Zeus, once a pillar of royal authority, began to fray as Greece evolved from monarchies to democracies and oligarchies. By the late Archaic period, the collapse of Mycenaean palaces around 1200 BCE, evidenced by charred ruins at Pylos and Tiryns, had already shown the fragility of divine right rule. Now, in the classical era, rulers like the Athenian tyrant Hippias, ousted in 510 BCE, learned that claiming Zeus's favor could not shield them from revolt. You can imagine the tension in the Agora, where citizens whispered of omens, sudden storms, or falling statues seen as Zeus withdrawing his protection. The cult of Zeus remained a cultural cornerstone, but its role shifted. Temples, like the massive temple of Zeus at Olympia, completed around 56 BCE, stood as architectural marvels, their pediments depicting Zeus overseeing mortal struggles. Excavations reveal offerings from this period, bronze thunderbolt replicas, and inscribed dedications showing continued devotion. Yet, these were increasingly civic, not royal, acts. The Olympic Games under Zeus's patronage became a stage for city-states to flex their power, not individual kings. Historical accounts, like those from Pausanias, describe how Peleus, like Elis and Athens, used victories to bolster civic pride. Sidelining monarchs. You might picture athletes sweating under Zeus's statue, a 40-foot colossus by Phidias, while politicians plotted alliances in the temple's shadow. For ordinary Greeks, Zeus's mythology still shaped daily resilience. In rural Attica, farmers invoked Zeus Ombrios, god of rain, during droughts, as seen in 4th century BC votive reliefs depicting families offering barley cakes. But the moral order Zeus represented, rigid, hierarchical, was tested by intellectual shifts. Philosophers like Anaxagoras, active around 50 BCE, questioned divine causation, attributing thunder to natural phenomena, not Zeus's wrath. This skepticism, recorded in Plato's dialogues, weakened the myths that propped up royal power. Political upheavals, like the Peloponnesian War for 31 to 400 for BCE, further exposed the limits of divine sanction. Leaders who leaned on Zeus's name, like Spartan king Aegisthus, faced distrust when defeats piled up, as Thucydides notes. By the Hellenistic period, after 323 BCE, Zeus's cult persisted, but its political weight diminished. New rulers like the Antigonids in Macedon favored gods like Apollo or Athena, better suited to their cosmopolitan empires. The Roman conquest in 146 BC further marginalized Zeus's sanctuaries, with many, like Dodona, falling into disrepair. Archaeological finds, cracked altars, scattered votives tell of gradual abandonment. Yet, Zeus's legacy endured in how his myths shaped Greek identity, teaching resilience through tales of divine justice and mortal striving. As you stand in the fading storm, consider this. The fall of Zeus's mortal mirrors reflects a timeless truth. Power, divine or not, crumbles when it ignores the will of the people. How does this ancient tension between authority and autonomy resonate in our modern struggles for governance and belief? Hades' silent realm, funerary customs, and the fear of the underworlders. You wander through the quiet necropolis of Athens in the 7th century BCE. The air carries the faint scent of cypress and burnt offerings, a reminder of the silent realm, of Hades, the god who ruled the underworld in Greek mythology. Unlike the thunderous Zeus or radiant Apollo, Hades was a shadowy figure, rarely worshipped directly, but ever present in the rituals that guided souls to his domain. His myth shaped the funerary customs of ancient Greece, reflecting a society grappling with mortality and the unseen. You can picture a family gathered at a grave, their hands smearing olive oil on a stele, a carved stone slab marking the resting place of a loved one. These practices, rooted in the Bronze Age and evolving through the Archaic period, were not just about honoring the dead, but about appeasing Hades to ensure safe passage to the afterlife. Archaeological evidence from sites like the Keramakos cemetery in Athens reveals the depth of these customs. By the 8th century BCE, Greeks buried their dead with care, placing pottery, jewelry, and small figurines in graves to comfort the soul. Excavations uncover lekythoi slender oil flasks painted with scenes of mourners, suggesting rituals that blended grief with offerings to Hades. The Homeric epics, composed around 750 BCE, described the underworld as a gloomy meadow where shades wandered, unable to speak unless offered blood. This belief drove practices like animal sacrifices at grave sites, as families sought to give their dead strength in Hades' realm. You might envision a widow pouring wine into a shallow trench, her whispered prayers mingling with the smoke of a burnt ram, hoping to ease her husband's journey. For ordinary Greeks, death was a communal affair. Inscriptions from the 6th century BCE detail laws regulating funerals to prevent excess. As in Athens, where Solon's reforms around 594 BCE limited lavish displays to curb aristocratic power. Yet, even modest burials involved offerings to Hades, and Persephone, his queen, often in the form of pomegranates or honey cakes left at graves. These acts reflected a moral order shadowed by fear. The underworld was not a place of punishment for most, but a cold, unchanging eternity. Myths of Hades abducting Persephone, preserved in the Homeric hymn to Demeter from the 7th century BCE, underscored his unyielding nature, a reminder that death spared no one, rich or poor. This fear permeated daily life. Potters crafted vases, with underworld scenes found in tombs across Attica, while rural households kept small altars to chthonic deities, including Hades, to ward off misfortune. Historical accounts, like those from Herodotus, mention Greeks consulting seers before burials to interpret omens, ensuring the dead were properly laid to rest. Yet, beneath these rituals lay a tension. The living sought to control what they could not know. As you stand among the graves, the silence of Hades' realm raises a question. How did these meticulous customs shape the Greeks' understanding of life and death? And what hidden anxieties drove their devotion to an unseen god? The shadows deepen as you linger in the necropolis, the flickering light of oil lamps casting eerie shapes on the grave steles. In the 6th century BCE, Hades' silent realm loomed large in the Greek psyche, not as a place of divine wrath, but as a mirror to the fragility of existence. Funerary customs, shaped by myths of the underworld, were a bridge between the living and the dead, blending practicality with spiritual dread. You can imagine a procession winding through Athens, mourners, clad in dark robes, their chants echoing as they carry a body to its grave. These rituals, documented in archaeological finds and texts like the Iliad, were meticulous. Bodies were washed, anointed with oils, and wrapped in linen, often with a coin placed in the mouth to pay Charon, the mythical ferryman of the Styx, for passage to Hades' domain. Excavations at sites like Eretria and Corinth reveal how these customs evolved. By the 7th century BCE, cremation became common in some regions, with ashes stored in urns alongside offerings like bronze pins or terracotta figures. Believed to serve the dead in the afterlife, in Athens, inhumation burial in the ground remained prevalent, with graves marked by pottery or stone markers inscribed with epitaphs. A 6th century BCE stele from Attica, now in the Athens National Museum, bears a simple inscription, "Here lies Clio, beloved wife." Such markers, often adorned with carvings of Hades symbols like the bident or Cerberus, show how deeply his myth permeated even humble burials. You might picture a potter in his workshop, shaping a vase with Persephone's ascent from the underworld, a reminder of life's cyclical hope amid death's finality. These customs were not just personal but political. City-states regulated funerals to maintain social order, as seen in laws from Sparta and Athens limiting excessive mourning to prevent displays of wealth that could spark unrest. Yet, the fear of Hades' judgment persisted. Myths described in Hesiod's Theogony portrayed the underworld as a place where shades faced no torment unless they defied the gods, yet its bleakness haunted the living. Families performed annual rites, like the Genesia festival in Athens, offering food and libations at graves to keep the dead content in Hades' realm. Inscriptions from the 5th century BCE record offerings to the gods below, including Hades, to avert misfortune, revealing a society anxious to placate an unseen power. This anxiety influenced daily life. Rural households maintained small shrines to chthonic deities, while urban artisans crafted amulets inscribed with Hades' name to protect against untimely death. Historical accounts, like those from Thucydides, describe how plagues, like the one in Athens in the 30 BCE, intensified fears of the underworld, with mass burials disrupting traditional rites. As you watch the mourners' lamps fade into the dusk, a question stirs. How did these rituals, born of fear and reverence, hold communities together in the face of death? And what happened when those bonds began to fray? The necropolis lies still. Now, its silence broken only by the wind rustling through ancient cypresses. As you stand in the fading light of the 5th century BCE, Hades' silent realm, a constant in Greek consciousness, shaped funerary customs that both united and divided society. By this time, the rituals surrounding death had grown more elaborate, yet they faced challenges as Greece's social and intellectual landscape shifted. You can envision a family gathered at a grave, their hands trembling as they pour libations into the earth, hoping to secure their loved one's peace in Hades' unchanging domain. These acts, rooted in centuries of tradition, were a testament to human resilience, but they also revealed a growing tension between old fears and new ideas that would ultimately reshape the underworld's hold on the living. Archaeological finds from the Kerameikos show increasingly ornate burials by the 5th century BCE, with marble steles replacing simpler markers. Wealthy families erected monuments carved with scenes of departure, often depicting Hermes' Psychopompos guiding souls to Hades. These graves, filled with gold jewelry and painted vases, reflected status but also a deeper need to appease the underworld's ruler. Poorer households, unable to afford such displays, still followed tradition, placing clay figurines or a single coin in graves as seen in excavations across Attica. The Homeric hymn to Demeter, from the 7th century BCE but still influential, framed Hades as a stern but just god, his marriage to Persephone offering a glimmer of hope for rebirth. Yet, this hope was tempered by the underworld's stark reality, described by poets like Pindar as a place of shadowy paths, where most shades lingered in eternal obscurity. The moral order tied to Hades' myths began to falter as new philosophies emerged. By the 5th century BCE, thinkers like Epicurus, though later in influence, questioned the fear of death, arguing that the soul dissolved at death, not wandered in Hades' realm. This skepticism, echoed in Sophocles' tragedies, challenged the rituals that defined Greek funerals. During the Peloponnesian War for 314 BCE, mass deaths overwhelmed traditional practices, as Thucydides describes bodies piled in makeshift graves, disrupting offerings to Hades. Such crises exposed the limits of ritual in maintaining social cohesion. Political changes, like Athens' democratic reforms, further shifted focus from divine to civic duties, with public funerals honoring war dead over individual rites to chthonic gods. By the Hellenistic period, after 323 BCE, Hades' cult waned. Mystery religions, like the Eleusinian mysteries tied to Persephone, offered hope of a better afterlife, overshadowing the grim underworld of earlier myths. Roman conquest in 146 BCE and the rise of Christianity by the 4th century CE further diminished Hades' influence, with his temples, like those at Ephyra, left in ruins. Archaeological evidence crumbled altars, scattered offerings, tales of a slow decline. Yet, the legacy of these customs endures in how they taught Greeks to face mortality with ritual and resilience. As you leave the necropolis, reflect on this. The fear of Hades shaped a culture that honored the dead, but its fading reminds us that even the deepest traditions evolve. How do our modern rituals for the departed echo or diverge from this ancient dance with the unseen? Athena's calculated wisdom, craft guilds, and the patronage of wearers. You step into the bustling streets of Athens in the 6th century BCE. The clatter of looms and the rhythmic tap of chisels fill the air, a testament to Athena, goddess of wisdom and craft, whose calculated influence shaped the lives of artisans and warriors alike. Her mythology, rooted in practical skill and strategic warfare, was no mere divine tale. It was a blueprint for the labor and martial pride that defined Greek city-states. You can picture a potter in the Kerameikos district, his hands shaping clay into a vase adorned with Athena's owl, or a blacksmith hammering bronze for a shield, both invoking her name for precision. Athena's patronage extended beyond that workshop to the battlefield, where hoplites marched under her aegis, the mythical shield symbolizing divine protection. Her cult, centered in temples like the Parthenon, built later in 447 BCE, wove together the mundane and the martial in a society obsessed with order and skill. Archaeological evidence from Athens reveals the depth of Athena's influence on craft guilds. By the 7th century BCE, potters, weavers, and metalworkers formed loose associations, often dedicating their workshops to Athena Ergain, the worker goddess. Excavations in the Agora uncover clay plaques inscribed with her name, left as offerings by artisans seeking her favor. These guilds, while not formalized until the 5th century BCE, were vital to Athens' economy, producing pottery for export across the Mediterranean. From Etruria to Egypt, you might envision a weaver, her fingers deftly threading wool dyed with murex purple, creating textiles for Athena's festivals like the Panathenaea, where her sacred peplos, a richly woven robe, was presented to her. Statue inscriptions from the 6th century BCE detail the labor of women and slaves in these tasks. Their work both a craft and an act of devotion. Athena's martial aspect was equally potent. Myths, like those in the Iliad c. 750 BCE, portray her guiding heroes like Odysseus with calculated wisdom, her strategies turning the tide in war. In real life, her temples served as armories, storing shields and spears blessed in her name. Historical accounts, such as Herodotus's, describe how Athens invoked Athena Polias, guardian of the city, before battles like Marathon in 490 BCE, crediting her for victory. For ordinary Greeks, her myths reinforced a moral order of discipline and ingenuity, whether in crafting a perfect amphora or forming a phalanx. Yet, this order was rigid, favoring skilled citizens over slaves or foreigners, as guild records show restricted membership. As you watch the artisans toil under Athena's watchful gaze, a question lingers. How did her divine patronage shape the interplay of craft and war? And what tensions arose when her wisdom was tested by human ambition? The hum of Athens' workshops grows louder as you move deeper into the 5th century BCE, where Athena's calculated wisdom guided both the delicate hands of artisans and the disciplined ranks of soldiers. Her dual role as patron of craft and war was not just mythological, it was a practical force in shaping Greek society. In the Agora, craft guilds flourished under her name, their members producing goods that defined Athens' cultural and economic might. You can imagine a bronzesmith, sweat beading on his brow, casting a helmet adorned with Athena's owl, his work destined for a hoplite or a temple offering. Archaeological finds, like the 5th century BCE pottery kilns in the Kerameikos, reveal the scale of production. black figure vases depicting Athena in battle were traded as far as Sicily, spreading her cult and Athens' influence. Guilds, now more organized, operated under strict hierarchies, with master craftsmen training apprentices, often invoking Athena again for skill and patience. The Panathenaea, Athens' grand festival for Athena, was a showcase of her patronage. Every few years, as described in inscriptions from the 50 BCE, citizens and metics resident foreigners paraded through the city, presenting a new peplos to Athena's statue. Weavers, mostly women, spent months crafting this robe, their looms, echoing with hymns to the goddess. These rituals, depicted on the Parthenon frieze, were not just religious but economic, boosting trade in textiles and pottery. Yet, the guild's exclusivity favoring male citizens sparked tensions. Slaves and women, vital to production, were rarely acknowledged, as seen in the lack of their names in guild records, highlighting the moral order's inequities under Athena's shadow. On the battlefield, Athena's wisdom was a rallying cry. Her myths of strategic brilliance, like her aid to Achilles in the Iliad, inspired military strategies. During the Persian Wars, Athens' victory at Salamis in 80 BCE was attributed to her guidance, with naval commanders dedicating altars to Athena Nike victory. Excavations on the Acropolis uncover votive shields inscribed with her name, left by soldiers seeking protection. This martial devotion shaped daily life. Blacksmiths crafted spears in her honor, while families prayed at household altars for sons' safe return. But cracks appeared. Thucydides notes how overconfidence in divine favor led to disastrous campaigns, like the Sicilian expedition of 15 BCE, where Athens' hubris clashed with Athena's call for restraint. As you stand amid the clang of workshops and the march of hoplites, a question emerges. How did Athena's dual patronage balance the demands of peace and war? And what happened when her wisdom could no longer unify a fractured city? The sun sets over Athens' Acropolis, casting long shadows from the Parthenon's columns in the late 5th century BCE, where Athena's calculated wisdom once promised order, but now faced a world unraveling. Her patronage of craft guilds and warfare had shaped Athens into a cultural and military powerhouse, yet the very systems she inspired discipline, skill, and civic pride began to strain under social and political pressures. You can picture the final moments of the Panathenaea. As a new peplos is draped over Athena's statue, the crowd's cheers masking growing divisions. The goddess who guided artisans and warriors alike could not shield Athens from the consequences of its own ambitions, nor preserve the moral order her myths upheld. Archaeological evidence from the Agora shows the peak of craft guilds' influence. By 50 BCE, potters and metalworkers produced intricate works, red figure vases, bronze armor often inscribed with Athena's symbols, like the Gorgonian from her aegis. These goods, found in shipwrecks from Rhodes to Marseille, fueled Athens' economy, with guilds organizing labor and festivals under her name. But this prosperity was uneven. Inscriptions reveal that slaves, who formed the backbone of workshops, were excluded from guild honors, while women weavers, though essential to the Panathenaea, remained unnamed in records. This exclusion, rooted in Athena's hierarchical order, bred resentment, as seen in 5th century BCE graffiti protesting labor conditions. Militarily, Athena's legacy faltered. Her myths of strategic brilliance, celebrated in Aeschylus's plays, like Eumenides for 58 BCE, inspired Athens' naval dominance, but overreach led to ruin. The Peloponnesian War for 31 to 400 for BCE exposed the limits of her patronage, as Thucydides recounts Athens' defeat in Sicily, where prayers to Athena went unanswered. Temples, once armories, became symbols of lost glory. Excavations uncover looted, votive offerings from this period. As democracy grew, civic pride shifted from divine to human achievement, with leaders like Pericles emphasizing reason over mythology. Philosophers like Plato, active by 400 BCE, questioned divine intervention, weakening Athena's hold on the Athenian psyche. By the Hellenistic period post 323 BCE, her cult persisted, but its influence waned. New powers like Macedon favored Gods like Apollo and Roman conquest in 146 BCE reduced Athena's temples to relics. Archaeological finds cracked old statues, abandoned kilns tell of a slow decline. Yet, Athena's legacy endures in how her myths fostered resilience through skill and strategy, shaping Western ideals of craftsmanship and civic duty. As you gaze at the Parthenon's fading splendor, reflect on this. Athena's wisdom taught balance, but her fall shows that even divine order bends to human change. How do her lessons of discipline and ingenuity echo in our modern struggles for equity and innovation? Prometheus bound defiance, chains of innovation in Bronze Age workshops. You step into the smoky workshops of a Bronze Age Greek settlement around 1400 BCE. The air hums with the clang of hammers and the crackle of furnaces, where the myth of Prometheus, the titan who stole fire for humanity, resonates in every spark. His story, one of defiance against divine order, was more than a tale told by firelight. It mirrored the ingenuity and struggle of artisans who pushed the boundaries of craft. In Mycenaean Greece, Prometheus, bound by Zeus for his rebellion, symbolized the cost of innovation, a theme that echoed in the lives of potters, smiths, and weavers laboring in the shadow of palatial economies. You can picture a bronzesmith, his face lit by glowing embers, shaping a dagger with techniques that seemed almost divine, as if Prometheus himself had gifted the secrets of fire to his forge. Archaeological evidence from sites like Pylos and Knossos reveals the sophistication of Bronze Age workshops. Linear B tablets, deciphered in the 20th century, list inventories of bronze, tin, and tools, showing how palatial centers controlled craft production. Artisans, often working under the oversight of a Wainax king, crafted weapons, jewelry, and pottery that supplied both local elites and trade networks across the Aegean. You might envision a potter in a clay-streaked apron, kneading earth to form a kylix, a drinking cup later painted with scenes of Prometheus' torment, as seen in 6th century BCE vases. These workshops, fueled by fire, were the heart of innovation, producing goods that reached as far as Cyprus and Egypt, as evidenced by Mycenaean pottery found in those regions. Prometheus myth, first recorded in Hesiod's Theogony around 700 BCE, but rooted in older oral traditions, framed fire as humanity's greatest tool and curse. His punishment chained to a rock, liver pecked daily by an eagle, reflected the risks artisans faced. Overstepping social boundaries could lead to exile or worse. Historical accounts suggest skilled workers, while valued, were often bound to palaces, their labor tightly controlled. Tablets from Pylos mention smiths allocated bronze rations, hinting at a rigid hierarchy where innovation was both prized and restricted. For ordinary Greeks, Prometheus was a folk hero, his fire, a symbol of resilience in their daily grind, whether stoking a kiln or tending a hearth. Yet, this divine gift of fire carried a moral shadow. The myth warned of hubris, a lesson artisans knew well when their creations challenged elite power. Excavations at Mycenae revealed destroyed workshops, possibly from uprisings or invasions around 1200 BCE, suggesting the fragility of this order. As you stand amid the heat and sweat of the forge, a question burns. How did Prometheus myth inspire artisans to innovate? And what price did they pay for pushing against the chains of their time? The glow of the forge intensifies as you linger in a Mycenaean workshop of the 13th century BCE, where Prometheus' myth of defiance and fire casts a long shadow over the artisan's toil. The Titan's gift, celebrated in stories whispered among workers, was not just the spark that fueled their kilns, but a symbol of their struggle to create within a tightly controlled system. You can imagine a weaver at her loom, threading wool dyed with ochre, her patterns echoing the geometric designs found on pottery shards from turns. These artisans, from smiths to potters, were the backbone of the Bronze Age economy, their innovations driving trade and culture. Yet, their work was bound by the chains of palatial oversight, much like Prometheus bound to his rock for daring to defy Zeus. Archaeological finds from Knossos and Mycenae reveal the scale of craft production. Linear B tablets list hundreds of workers, men and women, free and enslaved, assigned to tasks like bronze casting or textile weaving. A tablet from Pylos dated to around 1300 BCE, records firekeepers who maintained kilns, their role critical to producing the fine pottery exported to the Levant. These workers, often unnamed, invoked Prometheus in small rituals, as seen in clay figurines of a bound figure found in workshop debris, possibly offerings for success in their craft. You might picture a smith pouring molten bronze into a mold, whispering a prayer to the Titan for steady hands, knowing a single flaw could cost him favor with the palace. The myth of Prometheus, later formalized in Aeschylus's Prometheus Bound, c. the 30 BCE, resonated with artisans because it spoke to their reality. Innovation came with risk. Palaces demanded uniformity, standardized pots, weapons, and textiles for trade, but artisans pushed boundaries, experimenting with new glaze techniques or alloy mixtures. Excavations at Glo reveal early bellows, evidence of advanced smelting that increased bronze output, a leap that mirrored Prometheus' gift of fire. Yet, this creativity could provoke suspicion. Historical parallels, like the later Athenian laws of Solon 594 BCE, show artisans penalized for disrupting trade norms, suggesting a moral order that valued stability over change. For ordinary Greeks, Prometheus was a beacon of resilience. Farmers and laborers, reliant on fire for cooking and warmth, saw his sacrifice in their daily struggles. But the palace's collapse around 1200 BCE, marked by burnt citadels at Mycenae and Pylos, hints at unrest perhaps from artisans chafing under control. As you watch the sparks rise from the forge, a question smolders: how did these craftsmen balance the spark of innovation with the weight of authority? And what sparked the fires that brought their world down? The embers of the workshop fade as you stand in the ruins of a Mycenaean settlement around 1200 BCE, where Prometheus-bound defiance once inspired artisans, but now lies buried beneath ash and time. His myth, a tale of fire and rebellion, had fueled the ingenuity of Bronze Age craftsmen, yet it also foreshadowed the collapse of the very system they served. You can picture a potter, his hands cracked from clay, shaping a final vessel before the fires of invasion or revolt consumed. His workshop, the Titan's story, preserved in later texts like Hesiod's works and Day c. 700 BCE, taught resilience but also warned of the cost of challenging divine or mortal authority, a lesson etched into the charred remains of palaces across Greece. Archaeological evidence paints a vivid picture of this climax. At Pylos, excavators found storerooms filled with unfinished bronze tools and pottery, abandoned as the palace burned around 1200 BCE. Linear B tablets, scorched but legible, list artisans' quotas, suggesting a system stretched thin by demands for weapons and trade goods. Prometheus' fire, embodied in the kilns and forges, had driven innovation. New pottery styles, like the stirrup jar, spread across the Mediterranean as seen in wrecks off Cyprus. But this productivity came at a cost. Tablets hint at labor, shortages and ration cuts, possibly fueling unrest among workers who, like Prometheus, chafed under their chains. You might envision a weaver, her loom silent, joining others in protest or flight as invaders approached. The moral order tied to Prometheus' myth began to unravel as external pressures mounted. The Iliad and Odyssey c. 750 BCE reflect a world where human ingenuity, sparked by the Titan's gift, clashed with divine retribution. Historical parallels suggest artisans may have played a role in the Bronze Age collapse. Some scholars propose skilled workers fled or rebelled, weakening palatial economies. By the Dark Ages 1100 to 800 BCE, workshops were decentralized, with small villages producing simpler pottery as seen in finds from Lefkindi. Prometheus cult, though never widespread, lingered in folk rituals with clay fire holders found in early Iron Age homes, symbols of his enduring legacy. As Greece rebuilt in the Archaic period, Prometheus' story inspired new forms of resilience. Artisans in Athens and Corinth, free from palatial control, developed black figure pottery, their designs echoing his defiance. But by the Hellenistic period post-323 BCE, his myth faded, overshadowed by gods like Athena. Roman conquest in 146 BCE left his altars, like those at Athens, neglected. As Christianity later erased pagan traces, excavations crumbled kilns. Scattered tools tell of a craft world lost. Yet, Prometheus' fire lives on in human innovation. From ancient forges to modern technology, as you sift through the ashes, reflect, his defiance sparked progress, but at what cost? How does our drive for innovation today mirror or defy those ancient chains? The fates' unseen threads, weaving women's roles in household prophecies. You enter a modest Greek household in the 7th century BCE. The rhythmic creak of a loom fills the air, where women weave not just cloth but the very fabric of fate. Guided by the myth of the Moirae, the Fates, Clotho, Lachesis, and Atropos, the three sisters who spun, measured, and cut the thread of life, were more than mythological figures. They reflected the quiet power of women in shaping household destinies through their daily labor. You can picture a weaver, her fingers deftly threading wool, her work imbued with prayers to the fates for health and prosperity. In a world where men dominated public life, women's weaving was both a practical craft and a sacred act, tying their lives to the divine order of destiny. Archaeological evidence from sites like Athens and Corinth reveals the centrality of weaving in Greek homes. Loom weights made of clay or stone litter domestic sites, indicating that every household, from rural farms to urban dwellings, had a loom. By the 8th century BCE, women produced textiles for clothing, sales, and trade, their work vital to the economy. Vases from the period, like those found in Attica, depict women at looms, often with symbols of the fates, spindles, or shears etched nearby, suggesting a spiritual dimension. You might envision a mother teaching her daughter to weave, whispering tales of Clotho spinning life's thread, as recorded in Hesiod's Theogony c. 700 BCE. Where the fates control even Zeus's will, these household rituals extended to prophecy. Women, barred from public oracles like Delphi, practiced domestic divination, using patterns in woven cloth or the fall of loom weights to predict outcomes. From harvests to childbirth, inscriptions from the 6th century BCE mention offerings to the Moirae small cakes, or wool strands left at household altars to ensure favorable fates. This mirrored the moral order of the fates myth. Life was predetermined, yet human effort could sway minor outcomes. For ordinary women, weaving was a form of resilience, a way to exert control in a world of uncertainty, where a single snip from Atropos could end a life, yet this power was constrained. Women's roles, like the fates threads, were tightly bound by societal norms. Historical accounts, such as those from Herodotus, describe women's labor as essential but undervalued, their prophecies dismissed as superstition by male elites. As you watch the loom's steady rhythm, a question weaves itself into your mind. How did these women use the fates myth to find agency in their confined roles? And what hidden influence did their household prophecies wield? The dim light of an oil lamp flickers in a Greek household of the 6th century BCE, casting shadows on the loom where a woman weaves, her hands moving in sync with the unseen threads of the fates. The Moirae Clotho, Lachesis, and Atropos were not just deities of destiny, but symbols of the quiet authority women held within the home. Their myth, woven into daily life, gave meaning to the repetitive labor of weaving, which sustained families and connected them to the divine. You can imagine a grandmother, her voice low, recounting how Clotho spins the thread of life while teaching her granddaughter to knot wool, each pattern a prayer for longevity. This act of weaving was both economic and prophetic, blending practical skill with spiritual insight. Archaeological finds from sites like Olympus reveal the scale of domestic textile production. By the 6th century BCE, households produced cloth for local use and trade, with loom weights and spindle whirls found in nearly every home. Painted vases, like those from Corinth, show women weaving with symbols of the fates, spindles, or distaffs, hinting at their role as household seers. These women interpreted signs, such as irregularities in thread or the shape of knotted cloth, to predict events like marriages or illnesses. Inscriptions from Athens, dated to around 500 BCE, record offerings to the Moire at domestic shrines, often wool or honey, seeking their favor for a child's birth or a husband's safe return. You might picture a woman pausing her loom to place a woven band on an altar, her whispered plea echoing the fates' unyielding power. This domestic prophecy was a form of resilience, allowing women to navigate a patriarchal society. The Homeric hymn to Apollo c. 600 BCE mentions the fates alongside oracles, suggesting their influence extended beyond myth into real practices. Yet, their authority was limited. Historical accounts, like those from Xenophon, describe women's predictions as secondary to male-dominated oracles, their insights often ignored unless validated by priests. The moral order of the fates, emphasizing inevitability, reinforced women's subservience as their prophecies were confined to the household. Still, their work shaped family decisions when to plant crops or arrange betrothals, giving them subtle influence. Tensions arose when these domestic rituals clashed with public skepticism. The rise of male-led institutions like Athens' democratic reforms around 508 BCE marginalized women's spiritual roles. As you watch the weaver's hands pause, a question knots itself in the air. How did these women wield the fates myth to assert influence within their homes? And what happened when their quiet prophecies began to unravel? The loom stands silent. Now, its thread still in the fading light of a 5th century BCE Greek household, where the myth of the fates once empowered women but now faces the pull of a changing world. The Moire Clatho, Lachesis, and Atropos had shaped the lives of weavers, whose work wove together cloth, prophecy, and resilience. Yet, as Greece moved toward democracy and rational thought, the quiet power of these women began to fray. Much like a worn thread under Atropos' shears, you can picture a young woman, her loom idle, gazing at a small altar to the fates, wondering if her predictions for her family's future still hold weight in a society increasingly skeptical of divine threads. Archaeological evidence from Athens' Kerameikos district shows the persistence of weaving into the classical period. Loom weights and spindle whorls, found in homes across Attica, indicate that women continued producing textiles even as domestic workshops grew. Vases from the 50 BCE depict women weaving, some with fates symbols like shears, suggesting their prophetic role endured, but inscriptions reveal a shift. Offerings to the Moire, once common, dwindled as public cults like those of Athena took precedence. Women's household prophecies predicting births or harvests lost ground to male-dominated oracles, as seen in Thucydides' accounts of the Peloponnesian War for 31 to 400 for BCE, where state decisions ignored domestic seers. You might envision a weaver, her predictions dismissed, folding her cloth in silence as men debated war in the Agora. Tensions arose when these domestic rituals clashed with public skepticism. The rise of male-led institutions like Athens' democratic reforms around 508 BCE marginalized women's spiritual roles. The moral order of the fates, emphasizing inevitability, reinforced women's subservience, as their prophecies were confined to the household. Still, their work shaped family decisions when to plant crops or arrange betrothals, giving them subtle influence. As you watch the weaver's hands pause, a question knots itself in the air. How did these women wield the fates myth to assert influence within their homes? And what happened when their quiet prophecies began to unravel? In the face of societal shifts, Dionysus veiled madness, wine trade routes and ritual excesses, you wander through the sun-drenched vineyards of Attica in the 7th century BCE. The sweet scent of ripening grapes mingles with the distant sound of ecstatic chants evoking Dionysus, the god of wine and ritual madness. His mythology, a blend of revelry and chaos, was not just a divine narrative but a reflection of the wine trade that fueled Greek economies and the rituals that bound communities. You can picture a farmer pruning vines, his hands stained with juice, offering a libation to Dionysus for a bountiful harvest. The god's cult, centered in rural festivals and urban theaters, shaped the lives of vintners, traders and worshippers, weaving excess into the fabric of daily survival. Archaeological evidence from sites like Chios and Naxos reveals the wine Trade's importance by the 8th century BCE. Amphorae, clay vessels stamped with regional marks, carried wine across the Aegean to Egypt and the Black Sea, as found in shipwrecks off roads. These jars, often inscribed with Dionysus's ivy or Thyrsus, show how his myth permeated commerce. You might envision a merchant in Corinth loading amphorae onto a ship, whispering prayers to Dionysus for safe passage, the Homeric hymn to Dionysus. C. 700 BCE tells of the god's power to transform pirates into dolphins, a tale that resonated with sailors navigating treacherous seas. Dionysus's rituals, like the rural Dionysia, were moments of communal release. Inscriptions from Attica describe festivals where farmers and slaves danced, drank, and performed skits honoring the god with goat sacrifices. These rites, held in winter when wine fermented, allowed social hierarchies to blur briefly as seen in 6th century BC vase paintings of masked revelers. Yet, this excess carried a moral shadow. Myths of Dionysus's madness driving the Myrmidons to frenzy or cursing Pentheus in Euripides' Bacchae. C. 405 BCE warned of the dangers of losing control. For ordinary Greeks, wine was both livelihood and risk, as overindulgence could ruin families or spark violence. The wine trade's growth brought wealth, but also tension. Historical accounts, like those from Herodotus, note disputes over trade routes, with city-states like Miletus competing for markets. As you stand among the vines, the hum of festival drums raises a question. How did Dionysus's cult balance the prosperity of wine with the chaos of its rituals? And what hidden conflicts bubbled beneath the surface? The vineyard's twilight glow deepens as you move into the 6th century BCE, where Dionysus's veiled madness courses through the wine-soaked rituals and bustling trade routes of Greece. His myth, a dance of ecstasy and danger, shaped not only the spiritual lives of Greeks but also the economic networks that carried their wine across the Mediterranean. You can imagine a trader in the port of Piraeus haggling over amphorae filled with dark red wine, each vessel stamped with Dionysus's ivy-crowned image. These jars, found in wrecks from Sicily to Cyprus, were the lifeblood of city-states, turning rural labor into urban wealth. The god's dual nature, creator of joy and harbinger of chaos, mirrored the delicate balance of this trade. Archaeological finds from Thasos revealed the scale of wine production. By 600 BCE, vineyards covered the island, with presses and storage pits uncovered alongside clay seals bearing Dionysus's name. These wines, prized for their potency, were traded as far as the Levant. As evidenced by amphorae in Phoenician ports, you might picture a vintner, his hands calloused, crushing grapes in a stone press, offering the first pour to Dionysus to ensure quality. Festivals like the City Dionysia in Athens, established around 530 for BCE, blended commerce and worship with wine-fueled performances of tragedy and comedy drawing crowds, as described in inscriptions. These events, funded by wealthy citizens, showcased Dionysus's power to unite communities through shared revelry. Yet, the god's rituals carried risks. Vase paintings from the 5th century BCE depict Myrmidons in frenzied dances, their abandon, a warning of excess. Historical accounts, like those from Xenophon, describe drunken brawls at festivals where social norms dissolved. The moral order tied to Dionysus demanded moderation, but his cult tempted transgression. Women, often excluded from public life, found agency in Dionysian rites. Leading processions are seen in reliefs from Delphi. However, this freedom was double-edged. Myths of Myrmidons tearing apart dissenters, like Pentheus, reflected fears of uncontrolled feminine power. The wine trade, too, sparked conflicts with city-states imposing taxes or seizing shipments, as noted in Thucydides' accounts of trade disputes. As you watch revelers sway under torchlight, a question ferments. How did Dionysus's cult navigate the line between communal joy and chaotic excess? And what tensions arose when wine's wealth clashed with its wild rituals? The vineyard lies quiet now, its vines heavy with grapes under the stars of the 5th century BCE, where Dionysus is veiled. Madness once fueled both prosperity and peril. His cult, woven into the wine trade and ecstatic rituals, had transformed Greek society. But the balance it demanded began to tip as war and reason reshaped the polis. You can picture a festival's end, empty amphory scattered, as a weary vintner sweeps his courtyard, pondering the god who brought both bounty and chaos. The legacy of Dionysus, celebrated in tragedies like Euripides' Bacchae, was a double-edged gift. Its unraveling exposing the fragility of the moral order it upheld. Archaeological evidence from Athens shows the wine trade's peak by 450 BCE. Amphorae from Chios and Lesbos, marked with Dionysus' symbols, filled markets from Massalia to the Black Sea, as found in shipwrecks. These vessels, some painted with scenes of satyrs, fueled Athens' economy, with taxes on wine funding naval power, as noted in inscriptions. Festivals like the Linnaea, depicted in 5th century BCE vases, saw communities unite in song and sacrifice. But excess often led to unrest. Thucydides describes how the Peloponnesian War for 31 to 400 for BC disrupted trade routes, with blockades starving cities of wine and sparking riots at festivals. Where Dionysus' promise of unity faltered, the moral order of Dionysus' cult, preaching moderation amid revelry, clashed with growing rationalism. Philosophers like Plato, writing around 400 BCE, criticized drunken rites as irrational, urging restraint over divine frenzy. Women's roles in Dionysian worship, once empowering, were curtailed as Athens' democracy prioritized male civic duty, as seen in laws restricting female-led rituals. The war's toll plagues. Losses further eroded faith with mass burials described by Thucydides, replacing festive offerings. By the Hellenistic period post-323 BCE, Dionysus' cult shifted to private mystery religions, promising personal salvation over communal excess. Roman conquest in 146 BCE and Christianity's rise by the 4th century CE left his shrines, like those on Naxos, in ruins as excavations reveal broken altars and scattered amphorae. Yet, Dionysus' legacy endures in how his cult taught resilience, through shared joy, shaping cultural traditions like theatre. As you leave the vineyard, reflect, his madness sparked creativity and connection, but its collapse shows the peril of unchecked excess. How do our modern celebrations, festivals, art, or indulgence echo or temper the wild spirit of Dionysus? Apollo's dual light, healing temples amid plagues, and imagine yourself wandering through the sun-baked hills of ancient Greece, where the air carries the faint scent of olive groves and distant sea salt. It's the 5th century BCE, and you stand before the grand temple of Apollo at Delphi, its marble columns rising like silent guardians against the rugged slopes of Mount Parnassus. Apollo, the god of light, prophecy, and music, was also the bearer of a darker gift, the power to unleash plagues upon humanity as punishment or omen. This duality defined his worship, drawing pilgrims from across the Hellenic world who sought healing in times of affliction. As you step closer, the low hum of chants from priests echoes through the sanctuary, reminding you that history's quieter moments, those of ritual, supplication, and survival, often shape the fate of empires, more than battles ever did. In the everyday rhythm of ancient Greek life, Apollo's temples served as vital hubs of communal resilience. The god's epithet, Phoebus, meaning bright or pure, symbolized his role in purification, but his arrows could just as easily bring disease as they could banish it. Historical records, etched into stone inscriptions and recounted by chroniclers, like Herodotus, reveal how these sanctuaries functioned not merely as religious sites, but as early medical centers. You might picture yourself among the throngs of supplicants arriving at Delphi, or the island of Delos, Apollo's birthplace, carrying offerings of laurel branches or small votive statues. These were ordinary people, farmers from Attica, merchants from Corinth, even slaves seeking respite from ailments that modern medicine would later identify as typhus or smallpox. The healing practices within these temples were methodical and grounded in the mundane details of observation and ritual. Priests known as hierais would interpret dreams and omens, often consulting the Pythia, Delphi's oracle, who inhaled vapors from a chasm to deliver cryptic prophecies. But beyond the mysticism, there was a practical side, incubation, where the sick would sleep in the temple's abaton, a sacred dormitory, hoping for divine guidance in their dreams. Archaeological findings from sites like the sanctuary of Apollo at Bassae show simple clay tablets, listing remedies, herbal poultices of myrrh and honey, steam baths in natural springs, and dietary regimens emphasizing barley, gruel, and figs. These weren't miraculous cures, but survival strategies honed over generations, blending faith with empirical knowledge. You can envision the dim torchlight flickering on walls adorned with friezes, depicting Apollo slaying the python, a symbol of chaos subdued, while attendants moved quietly, administering treatments to the afflicted, plagues those insidious visitors that swept through Peleus like Athens, amplified Apollo's dual nature. Take the Great Plague of Athens in 430 BCE, during the Peloponnesian War. As described by the historian Thucydides, it began subtly with headaches and inflamed eyes, escalating to fever, coughing blood, and gangrene. The city, overcrowded with refugees, became a breeding ground for despair. Amid the chaos, citizens turned to Apollo's temples for solace. Processions wound through streets, carrying images of the god, while hymns invoked his mercy. Paean, healer, avert this woe. Omens were scrutinized obsessively, a raven perching on a sacred altar, an unexpected eclipse, or the sudden blooming of a laurel tree. These signs, interpreted by seers, offered glimmers of hope or warnings of further doom. In one documented case from Epidaurus, a subsidiary healing site linked to Apollo through his son Asclepius, inscriptions detail how a plague-stricken farmer dreamed of the god prescribing a regimen of rest and herbal teas, leading to his recovery and a grateful dedication of a stone relief. Yet, as you linger in the temple's shadow, considering these rituals, you sense the weight of uncertainty. Plagues didn't discriminate, striking nobles and commoners alike, forcing societies to confront their fragility. Temples became repositories of collective memory, where survivors etched thanksgivings into walls, preserving stories of endurance. But what if the omens grew darker, foretelling not just healing but prolonged suffering? How did the priests navigate the line between divine favor and wrath? Especially when a new wave of illness loomed on the horizon, picture yourself standing within the precincts of the Temple of Apollo at Epidaurus, where the air is thick with the scent of burning incense and the murmurs of hopeful pilgrims. It's still the 5th century BCE, and the shadow of plague lingers over Greece, a reminder of Apollo's dual role as healer and harbinger of disease. As you move through the sanctuary, you notice the intricate organization of these sacred spaces, where faith and pragmatism intertwined to sustain communities through crises. The priests, clad in white robes, oversee a complex system of rituals and remedies, blending spiritual devotion with what we might now recognize as early medical science. The temple's role extended beyond individual healing to preserving social order, as cities like Athens grappled with the devastation of epidemics and the fear of divine displeasure. The daily operations of Apollo's sanctuaries were a study in meticulous routine. You can imagine the priests rising at dawn to perform purificatory rites, sprinkling spring water over altars and chanting hymns to invoke Apollo's favor. Inscriptions from Epidaurus, known as Iamata, or healing testimonies revealed the practical side of temple life. These stone records describe patients writhing with ailments, chronic fevers, blindness, or festering wounds, and the treatments they received. One account tells of a woman from Troezen, barren for years, who slept in the abaton and dreamed of Apollo instructing her to consume wild greens and dedicate a silver fiole. Months later, she bore a child and returned to offer her thanks. Such stories, etched into stone, served as both medical records and propaganda, reinforcing the temple's authority in a world where survival often hinged on trust in the divine. Beyond individual cures, Apollo's temples were economic and social anchors. They employed attendants, scribes, and even musicians who performed hymns to soothe the sick. Offerings poured in terracotta limbs, gold coins, and livestock funding the upkeep of these sprawling complexes. Excavations at Delos reveal storerooms filled with such dedications catalogued with bureaucratic precision. During plagues, these sanctuaries became refuges for the desperate, but they also faced scrutiny. Thucydides notes that during the Athenian plague, some questioned Apollo's efficacy, as temples overflowed with the dying. Priests countered skepticism by emphasizing omens, perhaps a sudden flock of doves circling the temple, as signs of divine favor. These interpretations, though steeped in superstition, were survival strategies, rallying communities to endure collective trauma. The interplay of omens and plagues shaped Greek society's worldview. You might picture a seer examining the entrails of a sacrificed goat, seeking clues to Apollo's intentions. A malformed liver could spark panic, while a clear sky after a ritual might restore hope. These practices, mundane in their repetition, were vital for maintaining morale. Yet, the temples weren't immune to the chaos of plague. Overcrowding led to sanitation issues, and priests sometimes struggled to manage the influx of sufferers. At Corinth, archaeological evidence suggests temporary shelters were erected around Apollo's temple during outbreaks, turning sacred grounds into makeshift hospitals. The priest's ability to adapt, offering practical care, alongside spiritual guidance, underscored their role as mediators between mortals and the divine. As you stand among the supplicants, watching a priest anoint a feverish child with oil, you sense the fragile balance of hope and fear. The temple's routines offered structure, but plagues were unpredictable, and omens could be ambiguous. What if the next prophecy foretold a catastrophe greater than the last? How would the priests and their followers reconcile Apollo's healing light with the persistent shadow of disease? As you linger in the fading light of the temple of Apollo at Epidaurus, the distant wail of a hymn carries through the evening air, mingling with the rustle of laurel leaves. It's still the 5th century BCE, and the sanctuary hums with the quiet resolve of those who have endured the ravages of plague. The climax of Apollo's influence lies not in miraculous cures, but in the enduring systems of resilience his temples fostered. These sacred spaces, blending ritual with practical care, became beacons of survival, guiding communities through the uncertainty of disease and divine will. The priests, with their meticulous records and rituals, wove a narrative of hope that sustained the Greek world, even as it faced the unrelenting cycles of affliction. The resolution of Apollo's role in times of plague came through adaptation and institutional endurance. By the late 5th century BCE, sanctuaries like Epidaurus had evolved into sophisticated healing centers, precursors to modern hospitals. The Iamata inscriptions reveal a growing emphasis on documenting successful treatments, creating a repository of medical knowledge. One record describes a man from Thessaly, crippled by joint pain, who, after dreaming of Apollo's guidance, was prescribed a regimen of warm baths and a poultice of crushed olives. His recovery, celebrated with a bronze tablet, reinforced the temple's reputation. These accounts, though rooted in faith, reflect a proto-scientific approach, with priests observing patterns in symptoms and refining remedies over time. You can imagine the quiet pride of a priest as he etched another success into stone, preserving a legacy of survival for future generations. Yet, the temple's impact extended beyond medicine. They were cultural linchpins, fostering unity in fractured times. During the Peloponnesian War, when Athens faced both plague and political strife, Apollo's sanctuaries offered neutral ground where rival factions could seek common solace. Festivals, like the Delphic Games held in Apollo's honor, drew crowds from across Greece, reinforcing shared identity through music, poetry, and athletic contests. These gatherings, mundane in their regularity, were vital for social cohesion, reminding you that history often turns on the quiet persistence of tradition rather than dramatic upheavals. Even as plagues subsided, the temple's economic role, managing vast donations and redistributing resources, helped stabilize local economies, ensuring their influence endured. The lessons of Apollo's dual light resonate in modern times. The blend of faith and empiricism in these ancient sanctuaries mirrors our own struggles to balance science and hope during pandemics. The meticulous record-keeping of the Iamata anticipates modern medical documentation, while the communal role of temples echoes our reliance on shared institutions in crises. Apollo's arrows, once feared as plague bringers, remind us of the unpredictability of disease, yet the resilience of those who faced it. Ordinary Greeks leaving offerings, priests tending to the sick offers a timeless lesson in endurance. The temple's legacy lies in their ability to transform fear into structure, chaos into ritual, and suffering into stories of survival carved in stone. Reflecting on this, you might wonder how such ancient practices shaped our modern understanding of healing and community. The quiet, repetitive work of Apollo's priests, often overlooked, built a foundation for resilience that echoes in hospitals and public health systems today. But what other forgotten rituals or figures from history might have similarly shaped our world, waiting to be uncovered in the shadows of the past? Hera's jealous vigil, marriage laws, and divine vendettas in Polus life. Imagine yourself standing in the bustling agora of Athens, circa 50 BCE, where the air hums with the chatter of merchants and the clatter of pottery. Above you, the Acropolis looms, its temples dedicated to the gods, including Hera, the formidable goddess of marriage and family. Her divine presence, often overshadowed by her jealous vendettas in myth, shaped the lives of ordinary Greeks through the rigid marriage laws of the polis. As you weave through the crowd, you notice women veiled in modesty, their roles defined by Hera's sacred domain, marriage, childbirth, and the household. These laws, though mundane in their legalistic detail, were the backbone of social order, reflecting both divine ideals and human struggles. Hera's watchful gaze, both protective and vengeful, loomed over every union, ensuring compliance but also sparking tensions that rippled through the city-state. In ancient Greece, marriage was less about love and more about survival, alliances, and lineage. The oikos, or household, was the foundation of the polis, and Hera's temples, like the Herion at Samos, served as symbolic anchors for these unions. Laws inscribed on stone tablets, such as those found in Athens' civic archives, dictated that a woman's primary role was to produce legitimate heirs. You might picture a young bride, barely 15, handed from her father's oikos to her husband's during the eng, a betrothal ceremony sealed with a handshake and a dowry of livestock or land. These transactions, recorded meticulously, ensured economic stability but bound women to a life of domestic duty. The gamos, the wedding itself, was a public affair, with processions to Hera's altar where offerings, figs, pomegranates, or woven garments sought her blessing for fertility and fidelity. Hera's myths, filled with tales of her wrath against Zeus's lovers, mirrored the societal obsession with controlling women's behavior. Legal codes, like those in Draco's laws or Solon's reforms, imposed harsh penalties for adultery, often punishing women more severely than men. A woman caught straying could be divorced, stripped of her dowry, and barred from religious festivals, effectively exiling her from communal life. Men, meanwhile, faced lighter consequences, reflecting a double standard rooted in Hera's divine archetype, jealous protector of the marital bond. Inscriptions from the Herion at Argos describe rituals where women prayed for marital harmony, burning myrrh and chanting hymns to appease the goddess. These acts, repetitive and bureaucratic, reinforced the social contract, ensuring the oikos remained intact. Yet, the lives of ordinary women reveal resilience amid these constraints. Take, for example, the case of a weaver from Piraeus, whose dowry dispute is recorded in a 4th century BCE court document. She challenged her husband's attempt to divorce her without returning her dowry, a bold act that invoked Hera's protective role. Such disputes, though tedious in their legal minutiae, highlight how women navigated rigid systems to assert agency. Temples, too, offered sanctuary. A woman fleeing an abusive husband could seek refuge at Hera's altar, invoking the goddess's authority. These small acts of defiance, often overlooked, shaped the social fabric as much as any law. As you stand in the agora, watching a wedding procession wind toward Hera's temple, you sense the weight of her divine oversight. Marriage laws bound families together, but they also sowed seeds of discontent. What happened when Hera's ideals clashed with human desires? or when a woman dared to defy the polis's rules. You're now walking along a quiet street in Corinth, where the Hera temple stands as a solemn reminder of the goddess's unyielding watch over marriage. The year is still the 50 BCE, and the polis hums with the daily grind of family life, governed by laws that echo Hera's divine mandate. These regulations, etched into the fabric of Greek society, were not just legal codes but tools of survival, ensuring the stability of the oikos amid political turmoil and economic uncertainty. Yet, beneath the surface of these orderly systems, tensions simmered between men and women, tradition and rebellion, and the divine ideal of harmony versus the messy reality of human relationships. Hera's temples, both sanctuaries and enforcers, stood at the heart of these conflicts. The legal framework of marriage was a complex web of obligations. In Athens, the Kyrios, a woman's male guardian, typically her father or husband, held absolute authority over her life. Legal texts, like those preserved in the Gordian Code from Crete, detail how dowries were negotiated with precision, often involving detailed inventories of grain, oil, or textiles. You might envision a scribe in the Agora meticulously recording a dowry agreement on a clay tablet, ensuring every jar of olive oil was accounted for. These documents were sacred to Hera, as they secured the oikos against economic collapse. But they also chained women to their roles as bearers of heirs. A woman's value was often measured by her fertility, and barrenness could lead to divorce or public shame. As seen in cases recorded in Athenian court speeches, Hera's festivals, like the Thesmophoria, offered women rare opportunities to gather outside the oikos. You can picture them assembling in a sacred grove, offering piglets and barley cakes to the goddess, praying for fertile wands or harmonious marriages. These rituals, though repetitive, were acts of communal resilience, reinforcing bonds among women who otherwise lived isolated lives. Yet, they also highlighted Hera's darker side. Myths of her vengeance turning rivals like Io into a cow, or cursing Hercules with madness were cautionary tales echoed in laws that punished nonconformity. A woman who defied her Kyrios risked ostracism or worse. In Sparta, for instance, legal records describe a wife banished to a rural estate for refusing to produce an heir, her fate sealed by Hera's altar. Despite these constraints, women found ways to resist. Court cases from Athens reveal stories of quiet defiance, a wife smuggling her dowry's profits to support a sibling, or a widow invoking Hera's name to delay remarriage. Temples played a dual role here, as both enforcers of tradition and havens for the desperate. At the Herion of Samos, inscriptions record women dedicating votive mirrors or spindles, symbols of their domestic lives. In exchange for divine intervention in disputes, these offerings, small and personal, were acts of agency in a system stacked against them. The priests, acting as mediators, sometimes advocated for women, citing Hera's protective aspect to sway magistrates. As you watch a young woman place a woven shawl on Hera's altar, you sense the precarious balance of her world. The laws ensured stability, but at what cost to personal freedom? And what would happen when the polis itself began to fracture, threatening the very oikos Hera was meant to protect? You stand now at the Herion of Argos, its ancient columns weathered by time. As the sun sets over the Peloponnese in the 50 BCE, the temple, a monument to Hera's guardianship of marriage, hums with the soft prayers of women seeking her favor. The climax of Hera's influence lies not in divine wrath, but in the enduring systems of marriage laws that held the polis together, even as they strained under the weight of human ambition and societal change. These laws, rooted in the goddess's ideals, resolved conflicts by reinforcing the oikos as the bedrock of Greek life. Yet they also revealed the limits of control in a world driven by individual desires and political upheaval. The resolution of Hera's role came through the codification and adaptation of marriage laws. By the 5th century BCE, Peleus, like Athens, had refined their legal systems to address disputes that threatened the oikos. Court orations, such as those by the orator Lysias, document cases where women leveraged Hera's sanctity to challenge unfair treatment. One such case involved a widow from Athens who, citing her offerings at Hera's temple, successfully reclaimed her dowry after her husband's death, securing her family's future. These legal battles, though tedious in their proceedings, were triumphs of resilience, showing how women used Hera's divine authority to navigate a male-dominated system. Temples became more than spiritual centers. They were legal and social hubs where priests mediated disputes, ensuring the goddess's laws aligned with civic needs. Hera's festivals, too, evolved to reflect changing realities. The Thesmophoria, once a ritual for fertility, became a space for women to voice grievances, subtly reshaping social norms. Inscriptions from Argos describe how women, during these gatherings, petitioned for lighter penalties in dowry disputes, citing Hera's protective role. These moments, small and bureaucratic, laid the groundwork for incremental change, loosening the strictest constraints of the Kyrios system. Meanwhile, the economic power of Hera's temples grew as offerings funded civic projects like wells or roads, tying the goddess's cult to the polis's survival. This interplay of religion, law, and economics ensured that Hera's influence endured. Even as wars and political shifts shook Greece, the legacy of Hera's vigil resonates today. The marriage laws of ancient Greece, though restrictive, highlight the tension between individual agency and societal order, a dynamic still evident in modern family law and gender debates. The resilience of women who invoked Hera's name to challenge injustice mirrors contemporary struggles for equality within legal systems. The temple's role as communal anchors, blending faith with practical governance, echoes in our own institutions, from courts to community centers. Hera's jealous oversight, once a symbol of control, also inspired acts of defiance that quietly reshaped history. Odysseus' wandering shadows, maritime trade, and the myth of Reton. Picture yourself standing on the windswept shores of Ithaca around 700 BCE, where the Ionian Sea stretches endlessly before you, its waves whispering tales of adventure and loss. The name Odysseus, the cunning hero of Homer's Odyssey, echoes through the salty air, a symbol not just of epic journeys, but of the gritty realities of maritime trade that defined ancient Greek life. While the myths paint Odysseus as a wanderer, battling monsters, the real-world traders of his era navigated treacherous seas to sustain their communities. There lives a blend of courage and mundane calculation. As you watch a small merchant ship, its hull laden with amphorae of olive oil, prepare to sail, you sense the weight of their world, a world where survival hinged on the sea, and every voyage carried the hope of return, shadowed by the fear of oblivion. Maritime trade was the lifeblood of the Greek ploys, connecting scattered islands and coastal settlements. Archaeological finds, like the shipwrecks off Chios, reveal the scale of this enterprise. Vessels packed with wine, grain, and pottery crisscrossed the Aegean, linking places like Miletus to Crete. You might imagine a trader, not unlike Odysseus, checking his cargo jars sealed with pitch, their contents listed on clay tablets. These records, found in sites like Knossos, detail shipments of barley or bronze tools, each transaction a lifeline for the Oikos and Polis. The sea, however, was no forgiving muse. Storms could shatter a ship against unseen rocks, and pirates, as mentioned in Thucydides' histories, prowled routes near the Cyclades, turning voyages into gambles with fate. The myths of Odysseus, though poetic, were grounded in these realities. His tales of survival outwitting the Cyclops or navigating Scylla and Charybdis mirrored the ingenuity required of real mariners. Navigation relied on stars, coastal landmarks, and hard-won knowledge passed down through generations. A captain might consult a Windrow's diagram scratched into a clay tablet to plot his course, while sailors offered prayers to Poseidon or Athena for safe passage. Temples on promontories, like the sanctuary of Artemis at Euboea, served as both spiritual and practical waypoints, where traders left votive anchors or miniature ships seeking divine protection. These offerings, small and repetitive, were acts of faith in a world where a single storm could erase a family's wealth. The human cost of this trade was steep. Families waited anxiously in ports like Piraeus, scanning the horizon for sails. Some traders, like Odysseus, vanished for years, their fates uncertain. Inscriptions from Rhodes record widows petitioning for their husbands' lost ships, their dowries sunk with the cargo, yet trade also brought resilience. Communities pooled resources, forming early cooperatives to fund voyages as seen in records from Aegina. These networks, though bureaucratic, ensured survival, turning individual loss into collective endurance. The myth of Odysseus' return, endlessly retold, gave hope to those waiting, a reminder that even the longest journeys might end at home. As you watch the ship fade into the horizon, its crew unaware of what lies ahead, you wonder, what drove these traders to risk everything on the sea? Was it merely profit, or did the myth of return, like Odysseus longing for Ithaca, fuel their relentless voyages? You're now aboard a creaking merchant vessel off the coast of Lesbos, the sea churning. Beneath you as the crew adjusts sails under a starlit sky. It's still 700 BCE, and the spirit of Odysseus lingers in the salty breeze. His myth a reflection of the traders who braved these waters. Maritime trade was not just a means of survival, but a complex web of human ingenuity, binding distant ploys through commerce and culture. As you grip the ship's rail, the crew's quiet chatter reveals the mundane realities of their work checking roads, tallying cargo and praying for conceal. Yet these routines, so easily overlooked, were the threads that wove the Greek world together, sustaining communities through the promise of return. The mechanics of trade were meticulous. Ships, often no longer than 20 meters, were built from pine and oak, their hulls coated with pitch to resist the sea's corrosion. Excavations of wrecks near Elonisos uncover amphorae stamped with city seals, evidence of standardized trade practices. A trader might carry 100 jars of wine from Chios to Corinth, exchanging them for wool or grain. Each deal recorded on wax tablets for later scrutiny. These transactions, preserved in archives like those at Delos, show a sophisticated economy. Where trust was fragile, you can imagine a captain negotiating with a foreign merchant, wary of deceit, much like Odysseus outwitting strangers in distant lands. Disputes were common, and temple arbitrators, invoking gods like Hermes, often settled them. Their rulings etched into stone dot the dangers of the sea shaped every aspect of a trader's life. Storms, unpredictable and fierce, could sink a ship. In hours, as recounted in Hesiod's works, and days where he warns of winter voyages, pirates, operating from hidden coves, were a constant threat. A 7th century BCE inscription from Thasos describes a merchant fleet ambushed near the Sporades. Its cargo lost, yet traders adapted. They sailed in convoys for safety, shared risks personally, and relied on coastal beacons fires lit at temples like Poseidon's at Salion to guide them. These strategies, born of necessity, mirrored Odysseus' cunning, turning perilous journeys into calculated risks. Sailors also carried talismans, small bronze anchors or fish-shaped amulets, offered Nephilim at ports, a ritual as routine as checking the wind. Communities back home bore the weight of these voyages. In port towns like Aegina, families depended on the safe return of ships to avoid ruin. Women, left behind, managed households, often selling woven textiles to supplement income, as seen in records from Miletus. The myth of Penelope, weaving and unweaving her tapestry while awaiting Odysseus, captured this reality. Waiting was an act of endurance. Temples played a role here, too, serving as banks where families deposited earnings or sought loans for new voyages. These institutions, with their ledgers and priests, were the unsung scaffolding of trade, ensuring economic stability despite the sea's uncertainties. As you stand on the deck, the horizon dark and unyielding, you sense the crew's quiet resolve. Each voyage was a leap into the unknown, driven by necessity and the faint hope of homecoming. But what happened when the sea claimed more than it gave, or when a trader like Odysseus returned to find his world irrevocably changed? You're back on Ithaca's rocky shore, the year still 700 BCE, as a weathered ship limps into harbor, its sails tattered but its crew alive. The myth of Odysseus' return finds its echo in these moments where the climax of maritime trade was not wealth but survival, the safe homecoming of those who dared the sea. The traders, like their legendary counterpart, carried the weight of their players' hopes. their voyages knitting together a fragile network of commerce that shaped the Greek world. As you watch families rush to greet the crew, their relief palpable. You realize that the true legacy of these journeys lies in the resilience of communities that endured loss, rebuilt, and sailed again. The resolution of this maritime era came through the institutionalization of trade. By the 7th century BCE, palaces like Corinth and Aegina had established formal markets and trade agreements. Documented in inscriptions like those at Delos, these agreements standardized weights, measures, and tariffs, reducing the chaos of earlier voyages. A merchant from Samos, returning with Phoenician glass, might now rely on a treaty ensuring fair exchange, his profits recorded in temple ledgers. These systems, dry and bureaucratic, were lifelines enabling palaces to recover from shipwrecks or pirate raids. Temples, like that of Apollo at Delos, became economic hubs, storing wealth and mediating disputes, their priests acting as early bankers. This structure, rooted in the mundane, ensured that trade persisted despite the sea's perils. The human stories behind these voyages reveal the cost and courage of survival. Excavations at Piraeus uncovered dedicated small bronze ships or anchors left by traders who survived storms, thanking Poseidon or Athena. One inscription from Naxos tells of a merchant who, lost for months after a wreck, returned to build an altar to Artemis, his survival a testament to grit and luck. These tales, less grand than Odysseus, but no less vital, sustained hope in coastal towns. Families, like Penelope's, adapted to absence, with women taking on roles as weavers or market vendors. Their work documented in household accounts. These efforts, repetitive and uncelebrated, kept the oikos afloat. Mirroring the endurance of Odysseus myth, the legacy of these traders resonates in modern times. Their maritime networks laid the groundwork for global trade, their cooperative ventures foreshadowing modern economies, the resilience of families waiting for lost sailors' echoes in communities, today that rebuild after economic or environmental crises. The myth of Odysseus, with its focus on cunning and return, reminds us that history's quiet heroes, traders, wives, priests shaped the world through persistence, not just epic deeds. Their votive offerings, buried in temple precincts, are testaments to a universal human drive to venture, endure, and come home. As you stand on the shore, watching the crew unload their cargo, you reflect on the countless voyages that built the Greek world. The sea gave and took, but the traders' stubborn hope, like Odysseus longing for Ithaca, drove them forward. Medusa's petrifying gaze, monster myths in frontier colonization. Imagine yourself standing on the rugged cliffs of Magna Graecia, southern Italy, around 600 BCE, where the wind carries the tang of salt and the distant crash of waves. The Greeks, ever restless, have ventured far from their Aegean homeland to establish colonies like Sybaris and Croton, carving out new lives on untamed frontiers. Amid these efforts, the myth of Medusa, her serpent-haired gaze turning men to stone looms, large, not just as a tale of terror, but as a reflection of the fears and ambitions of these colonists. As you gaze across the wild landscape, dotted with half-built temples and olive groves, you sense the weight of their world, where survival demanded taming both land and imagination, and where monsters like Medusa embodied the perils of the unknown. Colonization was a grueling endeavor, driven by overpopulation, trade, and a quest for fertile land. Archaeological evidence from sites like Metapontum reveals the meticulous planning of these settlements, gridded streets, clay drainage pipes, and small shrines to appease local spirits. You might picture a colonist, a farmer from Corinth, unloading amphorae of seed grain from a ship, his family trailing behind with looms and cooking pots. These settlers faced hostile landscapes, marshes teeming with disease, rocky soils resisting the plow, and indigenous tribes wary of newcomers. The myth of Medusa, with a deadly gaze, mirrored these dangers. Her story whispered around campfires to make sense of a world where a single misstep could spell ruin. Medusa's myth, rooted in older traditions, was more than a cautionary tale. Temples to Athena, who gifted Perseus the shield to slay Medusa, dotted colonial landscapes, their altars adorned with gorgon-faced medallions, These images, found in excavations at Taras, were apotropaic, meant to ward off evil. Colonists, far from the safety of their ploys, saw Medusa's gaze in the unknown, whether a sudden storm or a raid by the local Lucanians. Rituals to appease her, or rather her conqueror Athena, were mundane but vital. Offerings of barley cakes or terracotta Gorgon masks, buried at city boundaries as seen in remains from Locri. These acts, repetitive and bureaucratic, grounded settlers in a shared identity, linking their frontier struggles to heroic myths. The human cost of colonization was steep. Inscriptions from Sybaris record families lost to fever or skirmishes, their names etched on votive stones to Athena. Yet, resilience shone through. Colonists adapted, learning from indigenous farmers about local crops like lentils or irrigation techniques, as evidenced by hybrid pottery styles blending Greek and native designs. Women, often overlooked, played key roles, managing households and weaving textiles for trade. Their labor documented in loom weights found at Croton. Medusa's myth, with its focus on transformation, her head becoming a protective talisman, echoed this adaptability, turning fear into a tool for survival. As you stand among the colonists, watching them raise a stone wall under the shadow of a new temple, you wonder, how did these settlers balance the terror of the unknown with the hope of building a new home? What role did Medusa's myth play in shaping their courage or caution on these wild frontiers? You're now in the heart of a fledgling colony at Taras, southern Italy, around 600 BCE, where the scent of freshly tilled earth mingles with the smoke of sacrificial fires. The colonists, driven by the same restless spirit as Odysseus, labor to transform this frontier into a new polis, their lives intertwined with the myth of Medusa, whose petrifying gaze symbolizes the ever-present dangers of their world. As you walk through the settlement, past mud brick houses and a half-finished agora, you see workers carving Gorgon faces into temple lintels, a reminder that myths were not just stories, but tools for survival, shaping how these settlers faced the uncertainties of their new home. The practicalities of colonization were relentless. Archaeological finds from Taras reveal the effort to establish order. Land was divided into equal plots, as seen in survey markers, ensuring fair distribution among settlers. You might imagine a colonist, calloused hands gripping a wooden plow, struggling to break the rocky soil, while his wife barters woven cloth for local grain. These tasks, repetitive and grueling, were the backbone of survival. Yet, the frontier was unforgiving. Malaria, bred in coastal marshes, claimed lives, as evidenced by mass burials at Metaponton. Indigenous tribes, like the Iapygians, sometimes resisted Greek encroachment, their raids documented in later Greek chronicles. Medusa's myth, with its monstrous threat, gave form to these fears. Her image a shorthand for the chaos settlers sought to tame. Temples to Athena, Medusa's conqueror, were central to colonial life. Excavations at Croton uncover altars where colonists offered terracotta Gorgonians Medusa's severed head, believed to protect against misfortune. These rituals, though mundane, were acts of defiance against the unknown. Priests, acting as community leaders, organized festivals like the Panathenaea, where settlers reenacted Perseus' triumph, reinforcing their resolve. Inscriptions from Locri describe a ritual where colonists buried Gorgon amulets at city gates, a bureaucratic act to symbolically shield the polis. These practices, rooted in myth, fostered unity, turning disparate settlers into a community bound by shared fears and hopes. The human stories of these colonies reveal resilience amid hardship. A pottery shard from Sybaris bears a dedication from a woman named Clio, who offered a Gorgon-faced cup to Athena after surviving a fever. Her act a testament to personal endurance. Then, too, adapted, learning from native farmers to plant millet alongside wheat. As seen in hybrid agricultural tools found at Taras, these small innovations, often unrecorded, were as heroic as Perseus' slaying of Medusa, transforming hostile lands into thriving settlements. Women's labor spinning wool, managing granaries was vital, their contributions etched in loom weights and storage jars. The myth of Medusa, with its narrative of overcoming terror, inspired these settlers to see their struggles as epic, their survival a victory over the frontier's metaphorical monsters. As you watch a priest light a fire at Athena's altar, the Gorgon's gaze staring from the flames, you sense the colonists' fragile hope. They built homes and temples, but the frontier remained wild, its dangers ever present. How did they maintain faith in their new polis when Medusa's shadow disease, raids, or failure loomed so close? You stand now in the thriving agora of Croton, 600 BCE, where the hum of trade and the scent of olive presses signal a colony taking root. The myth of Medusa, once a spectre of fear, has become a symbol of triumph for these settlers, her petrifying gaze transformed into a protective emblem carved into city gates. The climax of their story lies in the establishment of stable ploys, where colonists overcame the frontier's perils through grit, adaptation, and the myths that gave their struggles meaning. As you watch a festival honoring Athena with dancers, mimicking Perseus' victory, you see how Medusa's tale helped these Greeks turn chaos into order, forging communities that endured. The resolution of colonial life came through persistence and integration. By 600 BCE, colonies like Croton had grown into prosperous hubs, their economies fueled by trade in grain, pottery, and textiles, as evidenced by amphorae found in wrecks off Sicily. Land disputes, once common, were settled through councils modelled on Greek ploys, their decisions recorded on stone stelae. You might imagine a colonist, now a citizen of Taras, negotiating with an Iapygian trader, their shared language of commerce blending Greek and native terms. This fusion, seen in hybrid pottery and bilingual inscriptions, marked a shift from conflict to coexistence, taming the frontier's monstrous unknowns. Temples to Athena, adorned with Gorgon motifs, stood as symbols of this victory there. Altars receiving offerings of oil or wool from thriving farms. The human toll of colonization gave way to stories of endurance. Inscriptions from Metaponton record a settler named Arian, who, after losing his family to fever, dedicated a Gorgon-faced shield to Athena, his farm's success a testament to resilience. Women, too, shaped this legacy, managing households and leading rituals during festivals like the Thesmophoria, where they prayed for fertile fields. Their work, documented in loom weights and storage jars, underpinned colonial economies. The myth of Medusa with Perseus' triumph inspired these settlers to see their struggles as heroic, their survival a defiance of the frontier's terrors. Priests reinforced this narrative, burying Gorgon amulets to petrify threats, a ritual that, though repetitive, cemented communal identity. The legacy of these colonies endures in modern times. The gridded streets of Magna Graecia, still visible in archaeological sites, influenced urban planning across the Mediterranean from Rome to modern cities. The resilience of colonists, blending Greek and native ways, mirrors how modern societies adapt to new environments, whether through migration or innovation. Medusa's myth, with its transformation of fear into strength, reminds us that stories shape survival, giving meaning to mundane struggles. The Gorgon's gaze, once a symbol of dread, became a badge of victory, much like the settlers' hard-won homes dot as you stand in Croton's agora. Watching a potter craft a Gorgon-faced vase, you reflect on the power of myth to transform fear into hope. These colonists built a world from the wilderness, their lives a quiet epic of survival. But what other myths, buried in the stones and stories of other frontiers, might reveal? Cronus devouring time, agricultural cycles, and Titanarofis Imogene yourself standing in a sunlit field in Boeotia, central Greece, around 700 BCE, where the rhythmic scrape of wooden plows against the earth fills the air. The myth of Cronus, the titan who devoured his children to defy fate, looms over these farmers as they sow barley and pray for a bountiful harvest. His story, whispered in the shade of olive trees, was more than a divine tale. It reflected the relentless cycle of agricultural life, where time itself seemed to consume effort and hope. As you watch a farmer scatter seeds, his hands calloused from years of toil, you sense the weight of a world where survival hinged on the land's fickle yield, and the fear of nature's wrath. Agriculture was the backbone of Greek society, with communities like those in Thessaly or Attica dependent on crops to sustain their oikos and polis. Archaeological evidence from sites like Lefkindi reveals the tools of this era: simple sickles, clay storage jars, and irrigation ditches carved into rocky soil. You might picture a farmer. His family gathered at a small altar to Demeter, offering the first grains to ensure fertility. These rituals, mundane yet sacred, were rooted in the myth of Cronus, whose devouring of his children echoed the land's capacity to withhold its bounty. Hesiod's Works and Days describes the farmer's calendar sowing in autumn, pruning vines in winter, each task timed to appease the gods and avoid famine. The myth of Cronus, with his sickle-wielding rebellion against Uranus, resonated deeply. With these agrarian communities, temples to Demeter or Zeus, who overthrew Cronus, dotted the landscape, their altars adorned with votive sickles or clay figurines of bulls. Excavations at Eleusis uncover offerings of barley cakes, berry to honor the cycle of growth and decay. These acts, repetitive and bureaucratic, were survival strategies, tying the farmer's labor to divine order. Yet, the land was unforgiving. Droughts, as recorded in inscriptions from Thebes, could devastate crops, leaving families to ration stored grain. Pests or blight, like the locusts mentioned in early Greek poetry, were seen as Cronus' lingering malice, consuming the fruits of toil. The human cost of this life was steep. Families labored together, children as young as 7 joining the harvest, their small hands preserved in the wear on tools found at Argos. Women ground grain into flour, their work etched in worn millstones, while men repaired plows or bartered surplus at local markets. These tasks, though tedious, built resilience. Communal granaries, like those at Corinth, stored excess to guard against lean years, their inventories meticulously recorded on clay tablets. The myth of Cronus, with its theme of time's relentless march, gave meaning to these struggles, framing each harvest as a victory over chaos. As you stand in the field, watching the farmer pause to skim the sky for signs of rain, you feel the tension between hope and fear. The land promised life, but could just as easily devour it, much like Cronus himself. What drove these farmers to persist, year after year, in the face of such uncertainty? How did the shadow of the Titans myth shape their daily battle with the soil? You're now in a small village near Thebes, 700 BCE, where the golden heads of barley sway under a late summer sun. The myth of Cronus, the devouring Titan, lingers in the minds of farmers as they gather their harvest, their sickles glinting with each careful cut. Agricultural life was a cycle of relentless labor, each season a battle against time's unyielding march, mirrored in Cronus' tale of consuming his own to preserve power. As you walk past a granary, its clay jars brimming with grain, you see the intricate systems, both practical and ritual, that these communities developed to survive. Their lives a testament to resilience in the face of nature's caprice. The mechanics of farming were unforgivingly precise. Archaeological finds from Attica reveal ox-drawn plows, their wooden blades worn smooth, and terracotta pipes channeling water to parched fields. You might envision a farmer consulting a lunar calendar scratched onto a clay tablet to time his sowing, guided by Hesiod's advice to watch the stars for planting. These routines, though mundane, were critical. Crop rotation, alternating barley with lentils, preserved soil fertility as seen in field patterns at Corinth. Yet, nature often defied planning. Inscriptions from Delphi record a year when floods washed away seedlings, forcing villagers to rely on stored millet. The myth of Cronus, with his sickle and insatiable hunger, gave voice to these fears, framing drought or blight as divine retribution. Rituals tied to the agricultural cycle were as vital as the plough. Temples to Demeter, whose daughter Persephone escaped Cronus' lineage, hosted festivals like the Thesmophoria, where women buried piglets in grain to ensure fertility. Excavations at Eleusis uncover these offerings, their placement deliberate to appease the earth. Men, too, honored Zeus, Cronus' conqueror, with sacrifices of goats, their blood sprinkled on fields as recorded in sanctuary ledgers. These acts, repetitive and bureaucratic, wove the myth of Cronus into daily life, transforming fear of time's destruction into a call for diligence. Priests, acting as community scribes, recorded harvest yields on stone, ensuring fair distribution and guarding against famine. The human stories behind these cycles reveal endurance. A clay tablet from Pylos tells of a widow named Irene, who, after losing her husband to a storm, led her children in harvesting their plot, their survival etched in the grain they stored. Families worked as units, with children threshing wheat and women pounding flour, their labor preserved in worn tools and grinding stones. Communal efforts, like shared irrigation channels or granary cooperatives, as seen in records from Argos, spread risk across villages. The myth of Cronus, with its warning of loss, inspired these farmers to see each harvest as a defiance of time's hunger. Their persistence acquired heroism. As you watch a family stack sheaves under a fading sun, you sense the precarious balance of their world. The land could nourish or destroy, and Cronus' shadow loomed in every failed crop or barren season. How did these farmers find the strength to face another year, knowing time, like the Titan, could consume all they built? You stand now in the bustling agora of Corinth, 700 BCE, where farmers unload carts of wheat, their faces lined with the strain of a season's labor. The myth of Cronus, the Titan who devoured his children, has become a symbol of triumph for these communities, his defeat by Zeus mirrored in their successful harvests. The climax of their story lies in the system's agricultural, ritual, and communal that turned the land's uncertainty into stability. As you watch a priest pour grain onto Demeter's altar, you see how the fear of Cronus devouring time was transformed into a cycle of renewal, ensuring the survival of the polis through resilience and ingenuity. The resolution of agricultural life came through adaptation and cooperation. By 700 BCE, Peleus, like Corinth, had refined farming techniques, using terraced fields to prevent erosion, as seen in archaeological surveys of Attica. Crop diversification, wheat, olives, and vines reduced dependence on a single harvest, a strategy documented in Hesiod's works and days. Communal granaries, like those at Thebes, stored surplus, their inventories etched on clay tablets to ensure fair distribution during lean years. You might imagine a farmer, his plot thriving after adopting a neighbor's irrigation method, offering a votive sickle to Zeus's thanks. These innovations, small and methodical, tamed the land's caprice, turning Cronus' threat into a manageable rhythm. Rituals cemented this stability. Festivals like the Haloa, honoring Demeter, saw villagers share bread and wine, reinforcing community bonds. Excavations at Eleusis revealed clay figurines of ploughmen, buried to ensure fertile seasons, their placement as deliberate as the sowing. Calendar, priests, acting as stewards, oversaw these rites and recorded yields, their ledgers a bulwark against famine. The myth of Cronus, once a tale of destruction, became a narrative of defiance, with each harvest a victory over time's hunger. Inscriptions from Argos tell of a farmer named Lycos who, after a drought, rebuilt his fields and dedicated a stone relief to Demeter, his story a testament to endurance. The human legacy of these farmers is profound. Families, like Irenaeus, passed down knowledge of soil and seasons, their tools sickles, millstones bearing the marks of their labor. Women's work, grinding grain or weaving baskets, underpinned the oikos, their contributions etched in household artifacts. Communal efforts, from shared plows to village festivals, built a resilience that echoed Zeus' triumph over Cronus. These farmers, though ordinary, were heroes of persistence, their lives a quiet epic of survival. Today, their legacy endures in modern agriculture's crop rotations and communal cooperatives. Rooted in those ancient fields, the myth of Cronus, with its warning of time's power, reminds us that survival demands adaptation, much like today's farmers facing climate shifts. As you stand in the agora, watching a child hand a barley loaf to a priest, you reflect on the cycles that sustain us. These farmers defied time's devouring maw, building a world from the soil. But what other ancient struggles, hidden in the furrows and altars of history, might reveal the quiet forces that shape our present? Hestia's silent hearth, domestic rituals, and the heart of the oikos Imogenia self-stepping into a modest clay brick house in Athens, around 500 BCE, where the faint glow of a hearth fire casts shadows on whitewashed walls. The goddess Hestia, guardian of the hearth, presides over this oikos, the household that formed the core of Greek life. Her presence, quiet and unassuming, was invoked in every home through daily rituals that sustained families and, by extension, the polis itself. As you stand near the hearth, the scent of burning olive wood mingling with freshly baked bread, you feel the rhythm of domestic life, where mundane tasks and sacred duties intertwine to ensure survival in a world of uncertainty. The oikos was more than a home. It was an economic and social unit responsible for food, shelter, and lineage. Archaeological finds from sites like Olympus reveal the layout of these homes: a central courtyard, a hearth for cooking, and small storerooms packed with clay jars of grain or oil. You might picture a woman, the carrier of the house, tending the fire, her hands dusted with flour as she kneads dough for barley loaves. Hestia's altar, often just a simple stone slab by the hearth, was the focal point of daily offerings: dribbles of wine, crumbs of bread, or sprigs of laurel, acts so routine they were barely noticed but vital to maintaining divine favor. These rituals, described in Hesiod's Theogony, tied the family to Hestia's eternal flame. Symbolizing continuity, the hearth was the heart of domestic life, its fire never allowed to die. Excavations at Delos uncover hearths with ash layers centuries thick, evidence of their constant use. Women, tasked with its upkeep, performed repetitive chores: sweeping ash, fetching water, grinding grain that anchored the oikos. Men, meanwhile, managed external affairs, bartering surplus wool or oil in the agora. As seen in clay tablets from Pylos listing household inventories, these tasks, though tedious, were survival mechanisms ensuring the family's self-sufficiency. Hestia's myth, emphasizing stability and order, gave meaning to these routines, framing the hearth as a sacred bulwark against chaos. Yet, life in the oikos was precarious. A failed harvest or illness could unravel a family's stability, as recorded in Athenian court documents where widows petitioned for aid after losing their kyrios. Women's resilience shone through in these moments, spinning wool to sell, as evidenced by loom weights found in homes, or invoking Hestia's name in disputes to claim household rights. Communal hearths, like those in public buildings at Corinth, extended Hestia's protection to the polis, where citizens offered grain during festivals to ensure collective prosperity. These small, repetitive acts wove a tapestry of endurance, turning the oikos into a microcosm of Greek society. As you watch the Kyrios sprinkle salt into the hearth fire, a quiet prayer to Hestia on her lips, you sense the delicate balance of this world. The hearth held families together, but its flame could flicker under the strain of scarcity or loss. How did these households maintain their rituals when the oikos itself was threatened? And what role did Hestia's silent presence play in their survival? You're now seated in the courtyard of an oikos in Sparta, 500 BCE, where the hearth's steady glow illuminates a family preparing their evening meal. The goddess Hestia, ever present in the crackle of the fire, binds this household through rituals that seem ordinary but carry the weight of survival. The oikos was the foundation of the polis. Its daily routines, cooking, weaving, and offerings are microcosm of Greek resilience. As you watch a young girl learn to grind barley under her mother's watchful eye, you sense the unspoken rhythm of their lives, where Hestia's silent presence anchored families against the chaos of war, famine, or social upheaval. The daily operations of the oikos were a study in meticulous repetition. Archaeological evidence from Sparta reveals homes with hearths at their center, surrounded by tools: clay ovens, bronze ladles, and loom weights. You might envision the carrier stoking the fire, ensuring it burns through the night, a task as sacred as it was practical. Hestia's rituals were simple but non-negotiable. Before each meal, a portion of food was offered to the hearth as described in Homeric hymns. These acts, recorded on votive tablets from Delos, included pouring olive oil or scattering herbs, gestures that tied the family to the divine order. Men contributed by securing resources, trading surplus grain or hides, as seen in market ledgers from Corinth, ensuring the oikos remained self-sufficient. The hearth was also a social anchor. In times of crisis like the Messenian Wars, families gathered around it to share news or plan survival strategies. Inscriptions from Athens describe widows invoking Hestia's name to claim household authority. After losing their kyrios, their pleas etched in legal records. Women's labor was central, spinning wool, as evidenced by spindle whorls found in homes, or managing storerooms, their contents listed on clay tablets. These tasks, though monotonous, were acts of defiance against scarcity. Communal hearths, like those in Sparta's civic halls, extended Hestia's role, where citizens offered grain during festivals like the Carneia to ensure the polis's stability. As recorded in temple archives. Yet, the oikos faced constant threats. A single bad harvest, like those documented in Thebes during droughts, could deplete stores, forcing families to barter or beg. Disease, too, struck hard, with mass burials at Olympus revealing the toll of epidemics. Hestia's myth, emphasizing the hearth's eternal flame, gave families a narrative of endurance, framing their struggles as a sacred duty. Stories of resilience emerge from the records. A woman named Miran, widowed in Pylos, rebuilt her oikos by selling pottery, her dedication to Hestia inscribed on a clay shard. These small acts, often uncelebrated, mirrored Hestia's quiet strength, turning the hearth into a symbol of hope. As you watch the family share a simple meal by the hearth, their voices soft with gratitude, you feel the fragility of their world. The fire burns steadily, but external pressures, war, poverty, or loss could dim its light. How did these families keep Hestia's flame alive when the oikos teetered on the edge? And what deeper role did her rituals play in their survival? You stand now in the heart of a bustling polis, Corinth, 500 BCE, where the hearth's glow spills from every home, a testament to Hestia's enduring presence. The oikos, with its daily rituals, has become the bedrock of Greek life. Its survival a quiet triumph over time's relentless pressures. The climax of Hestia's story lies in the resilience of these households, where mundane tasks and sacred offerings transformed the hearth into a symbol of stability. As you watch a family light their hearth for the evening, their hands steady with purpose, you see how Hestia's silent flame held the polis together, weaving individual lives into a collective strength. The resolution of the oikos' role came through the codification of domestic practices. By 500 BCE, households had developed sophisticated systems to ensure self-sufficiency. Archaeological finds from Corinth reveal storerooms packed with amphorae of oil and grain, their contents meticulously inventoried on clay tablets. You might imagine a Kyria checking her stores, ensuring enough barley for the winter, her calculations as precise as any merchant's. Hestia's rituals, daily offerings of bread or wine, were formalized, as seen in inscriptions from Delos, where families dedicated small altars to secure divine favor. These acts, though repetitive, were anchors, tying the oikos to the polis through shared devotion to the hearth. The hearth also served as a communal hub. In times of crisis, like the Persian Wars, families rallied around it, sharing resources, or planning rebuilding efforts, as recorded in Athenian archives. Public hearths, like those in Corinth's Prytaneum, extended Hestia's protection, where civic leaders offered sacrifices during festivals like the Hestiaia, ensuring the polis's prosperity. Women's labor, spinning, cooking, managing households was vital. Their tools, loom weights, grinding stones found in every home. Inscriptions from Sparta tell of a widow named Calliope, who, after losing her kyrios, sustained her oikos by selling woven cloth, dedicating a clay lamp to Hestia in gratitude. These stories, small and uncelebrated, mirrored Hestia's quiet power, turning daily toil into acts of endurance. The legacy of Hestia's hearth endures today. The oikos' emphasis on self-sufficiency and communal bonds echoes in modern family structures and community support systems. Hestia's rituals, blending the sacred and practical, resemble how we use routine to find stability in uncertain times. Think of family dinners or community gatherings. The resilience of Greek women managing households under pressure reflects ongoing struggles for agency within domestic spaces. Hestia's flame, a symbol of continuity, reminds us that the mundane can be profound. anchoring societies through crises. As you watch the Corinthian family share a meal by their hearth, their faces lit by its glow, you reflect on the power of these quiet rituals. The oikos survived not through grand heroics, but through the daily devotion to Hestia's flame, a testament to human endurance. But what other forgotten practices, hidden in the hearths and homes of history, might reveal the quiet strength that shapes our world today? Athena's looming wisdom, textile trade, and civic identity. Picture yourself in the bustling agora of Athens around 450 BCE, where the clack of looms and the hum of bartering voices fill the air. The goddess Athena, patron of wisdom and crafts, presides over this scene, her myth woven into the fabric of daily life through the textile trade. Her image, often depicted with a spindle or loom, symbolized the skill and ingenuity of weavers, mostly women who sustained their oikos and shaped the civic identity of the polis. As you stand beside a stall piled with dyed wool and cloth, the scent of madder and saffron lingering, you sense the quiet power of these textiles, their threads binding families, markets, and even the gods to the heart of Greek society. Textile production was a cornerstone of the Greek economy, with Athens and other players like Miletus renowned for their wool and linen. Archaeological finds from Olympus reveal households equipped with clay loom weights and wooden shuttles, evidence of weaving's centrality. You might imagine a woman, the Kyrie of an oikos, working a vertical loom, her fingers deftly threading wool dyed with indigo or ochre. These textiles, cloaks, tunics, and sails were not just necessities, but trade goods exchanged for grain or oil. As seen in market records from Corinth, Athena's myth, particularly her gift of the olive tree and her role as a weaver, gave divine sanction to this labor, framing it as a sacred act of creation. The process was meticulous and labor-intensive. Women carded raw wool, spun it into thread, and wove it into cloth, their work preserved in the worn tools found in Athenian homes. Temples to Athena, like the Parthenon, were hubs for textile offerings, with the annual Panathenaea festival featuring a woven peplos presented to the goddess's statue. Inscriptions from Delos describe these offerings, dyed in vibrant hues and embroidered with scenes of Athena's triumphs. These rituals, though repetitive, reinforced civic pride, linking the weaver's craft to the polis's identity. Every thread, spun with care, carried the weight of economic survival and cultural continuity, yet the textile trade was not without hardship. Women, often confined to the oikos, worked long hours, their labor undervalued despite its economic impact. Court records from Athens document disputes over unpaid textile debts, revealing the precarious lives of weavers, some like a widow named Chloe, whose story is etched on a clay tablet from Piraeus, sold cloth to support her children after her husband's death, invoking Athena's protection in her trade. These women, through their quiet persistence, turned spinning and weaving into acts of resilience, their looms echoing Athena's wisdom in every careful knot. As you watch a weaver haggle over a bolt of cloth, her hands stained with dye, you feel the tension between her skill and her societal constraints. Textiles wove the polis together, but at what cost to those who labored at the loom? How did Athena's myth inspire these women to find strength in their craft? Even as they navigated a world that limited their voice, you're now inside a modest Athenian oikos for 50 BCE, where the steady rhythm of a loom fills the air, its wooden frame creaking as a woman weaves a vibrant cloak. Athena, goddess of crafts, watches over this scene, her myth inspiring the weavers who turned raw wool into the textiles that clothed the polis and fueled its economy. The textile trade was more than a household chore, it was a vital thread in the fabric of Greek society, connecting the oikos to the agora and beyond. As you observe the Kyria adjust her warp threads, her focus unwavering, you sense the intricate balance of skill, labor, and devotion that defined this craft and shaped civic identity. The production of textiles was a complex, communal effort. Archaeological evidence from Miletus shows workshops where women worked alongside slaves, spinning wool into fine threads dyed with murex purple or plant-based ochre. You might picture a group of weavers sharing stories as they card wool, their hands moving in practiced unison. These textiles were traded far beyond the polis, with Athenian cloaks reaching markets in Sicily. As recorded in trade ledgers from Delos, the Panathenea festival, centered on Athena, showcased this craft, with young girls presenting the goddesses. Peplos, its intricate patterns a symbol of civic pride. Inscriptions from the Parthenon detail the labor-involved months of weaving by chosen women. Their work a sacred offering to the polis's patron. The trade was not without challenges. Looms, though simple, required constant maintenance, as seen in the worn shuttle fragments found in Corinthian homes. Dyeing was arduous, involving boiling vats of pungent herbs, a process described in Theophrastus' writings. Women, often unpaid, bore the brunt of this labor, their contributions undervalued despite their economic impact. Yet, their resilience shone through. A clay tablet from Athens records a weaver named Lysippe, who, after her husband's bankruptcy, sold her textiles to settle debts, her success marked by a votive spindle dedicated to Athena. Temples, acting as economic hubs, stored surplus cloth, their inventories etched on stone, ensuring the polis's wealth during lean times. Textiles also reinforced civic identity. The peplos of the Panathenea, paraded through Athens, was a collective endeavor, its creation involving women from every oikos. Festivals like the Orephrius saw girls learning to weave, their training a rite of passage, as noted in temple records. These rituals, repetitive and meticulous, wove the polis together, linking individual labor to communal pride. Athena's myth, with a contest against her acne, reminded weavers of the divine value of their craft, even as it warned against hubris. The goddess's wisdom embodied in every thread inspired women to see their work as a contribution to the polis's glory. As you watch the Kyria pause to inspect her cloth, her fingers tracing Athena's owl embroidered on the edge, you sense the weight of her labor. The textile trade empowered women but confined them to the oikos, their work vital yet unseen. How did these weavers balance personal pride with societal limits? And what role did Athena's myth play in sustaining their efforts? You stand now in the shadow of the Parthenon, Athens, for 50 BCE, where the Panathenea festival unfolds, and a new peplos for Athena's statue is paraded through cheering crowds. The textile trade, guided by the goddess's wisdom, has woven itself into the heart of the polis, its threads binding individual oikos to the collective identity of Athens. The climax of this story lies in the enduring legacy of weavers, whose labor not only clothed the city, but also shaped its cultural and economic fabric. As you watch a young girl present a woven offering to Athena's altar, you see how the textile trade transformed quiet toil into a symbol of civic pride and resilience. The resolution of the textile trade's role came through its integration into the polis's economy and identity. By 450 BCE, Athens had become a textile hub, with workshops producing cloth for local use and export. As evidenced by amphory stamps found in Sicily, weavers, mostly women, perfected techniques like double weaving, creating durable fabrics, their skill preserved in intricate patterns on surviving textiles. Temples, like the Parthenon, served as repositories for these offerings, with inscriptions detailing donations of cloaks embroidered with Athena's victories. You might imagine a weaver, her hands steady from years at the loom, contributing to the peplos, her work celebrated in the festival's procession. This collective effort, documented in civic records, turned individual labor into a communal triumph. The human stories behind the trade reveal profound endurance. A votive tablet from Corinth tells of a weaver named Thalia, who, after losing her family to plague, sustained her oikos by selling dyed linen, dedicating a shuttle to Athena in gratitude. Women's labor spinning, dyeing, weaving was the backbone of the trade, their tools loom weights, spindles found in every home. These efforts, though repetitive, were acts of defiance against hardship, echoing Athena's wisdom in their precision. Temples also played a practical role, storing surplus textiles and redistributing them during crises, as seen in Delian inventories. Ensuring the polis's stability, the Panathenea, with its textile rituals, reinforced this unity, making every weaver a contributor to Athens's glory. The legacy of Athena's weavers endures today. The textile trade's emphasis on skill and community foreshadows modern industries. From fashion to cooperative economies, the resilience of Greek women, weaving under societal constraints, mirrors contemporary struggles for recognition in undervalued labor. Athena's myth, celebrating craft as wisdom, reminds us that the mundane can shape history. Much like how textiles defined Greek identity, the peplos of the Panathenaea, a symbol of unity, echoes in modern cultural festivals that celebrate collective creativity. As you watch the festival's procession, the peplos gleaming under the sun, you reflect on the weavers' quiet heroism, their threads wove not just cloth but the very fabric of the polis, their labor a testament to Athena's enduring wisdom. But what other unsung crafts, hidden in the looms and markets of history, might reveal the quiet forces that continue to shape our world? Poseidon's restless tides, fishermen's lives, and coastal survival. Imagine yourself standing on the rocky shore of Euboea around 650 BCE, where the Aegean Sea churns with restless waves, and the scent of salt hangs heavy in the air. The god, Poseidon, ruler of the seas, looms over this coastal world, his trident a symbol of both bounty and peril for the fishermen who depend on his domain. Their lives, shaped by the rhythms of tide and catch, were a delicate dance with nature's unpredictability, their work as vital to the polis as any farmer's plough. As you watch a fisherman mend his net under the shadow of a cliffside shrine, you feel the weight of a life tethered to the sea, where Poseidon's favor could mean survival or ruin. Fishing was a cornerstone of coastal Greek economies, sustaining communities from Chalcis to Rhodes. Archaeological finds like fishhooks and net weights from Lefkindi reveal the tools of this trade: bone harpoons, woven flax nets, and small boats carved from pine. You might picture a fisherman, his hands rough from hauling nets, casting off. At dawn in a skiff barely 10 meters long, his catch mackerel, sardines, or octopus was bartered in the agro or preserved with salt, as seen in storage jars from Miletus. Poseidon's myth, with his storms and gifts of fish, gave meaning to their labor, framing each voyage as a negotiation with the divine. The sea was both provider and predator. Fishermen navigated using stars and coastal landmarks, their knowledge, passed down through generations as described in Hesiod's works and days. Shrines to Poseidon, like those at Saunion, were scattered along the coast, where fishermen offered shells or clay fish figurines, their prayers etched on votive tablets. For safe return, these rituals, repetitive and unassuming, were acts of survival, warding off the tempests Poseidon could unleash. Yet, the risks were relentless. Sudden squalls could capsize boats, and treacherous currents like those near the Cyclades claimed lives as recorded in inscriptions mourning lost sailors. The human toll was heavy, but resilience defined these communities. Families worked together, with women and children cleaning fish or weaving nets, their labor preserved in the wear of bone tools found at Aegina. Coastal villages formed cooperatives, sharing boats or ketches, as seen in records from Thasos, ensuring no family starved after a poor season. The myth of Poseidon, with his dual nature of wrath and generosity, mirrored their lives, inspiring them to face the sea's dangers with stubborn hope. A fisherman's widow, noted in a Chalcis inscription, continued her husband's trade, her small boat a testament to endurance. As you watch the fisherman cast his net into the tide, his eyes scanning the horizon for signs of Poseidon's mood, you sense the fragility of his world. The sea offered life, but could just as easily swallow it. What drove these fishermen to brave its depths each day? And how did Poseidon's myth shape their courage in the face of such uncertainty? You're now aboard a weathered fishing boat off the coast of Rhodes, 650 BCE. The sea rocking gently beneath as fishermen haul in nets heavy with writhing fish. Poseidon's presence, both nurturing and fearsome, hovers over their labor, his myth woven into the daily grind of coastal life. Fishing was not just a livelihood, but a lifeline for the polis, its catch feeding families and fueling trade. As you grip the boat's edge, watching the crew salt their haul under a fading sun, you sense the intricate balance of skill, risk and ritual that defined these fishermen's lives. Their work a quiet echo of Poseidon's restless tides, the mechanics of fishing were precise and demanding. Archaeological evidence from Thasos reveals nets woven from flax, weighted with lead or clay sinkers, and boats built with cedar planks sealed with pitch. You might envision a fisherman mending his net, his fingers threading flax with practiced ease, or checking the wind's direction, guided by oral traditions passed down through generations. Catches were preserved with salt or smoked over fires, as seen in storage pits at Miletus, then traded for grain or pottery in markets like those in Corinth. These routines, though monotonous, were critical, with temple records from Delos noting fish offerings to Poseidon, ensuring his favor for the next haul. The sea's dangers shaped every aspect of this life. Storms could arise without warning, as described in Homeric epics, sinking boats and scattering nets. Inscriptions from Naxos recount a crew lost to a whirlpool, their families leaving clay fish at Poseidon's shrine in mourning. Fishermen countered these risks with ingenuity, sailing in groups for safety or using weighted lines to fish deeper waters, as evidenced by hooks found off shios. Shrines to Poseidon, perched on cliffs, served as navigational markers and spiritual anchors, their altars piled with shells or bone harpoons. These offerings, small and repetitive, were acts of defiance against the sea's unpredictability, tying the fisherman's labor to divine protection. Communities bore the weight of these risks together. In coastal villages, women cleaned and salted fish, their work etched in the wear of bone knives, while children gathered seaweed for dye, as seen in remains from Aegina. Cooperative systems, like those recorded in Thasian ledgers, saw fishermen pooling resources to repair boats or share catches after lean days. The myth of Poseidon, with his power to calm or churn the seas, gave meaning to their perseverance, framing each successful haul as a victory over chaos. A widow named Thalassa, noted in a Rhodian inscription, took up her husband's nets after his death, her small boat a symbol of resilience. As you watch the crew unload their catch, their hands steady despite the sea's restless sway, you feel the precarious balance of their world. Poseidon's tides could bring abundance or destruction, and every voyage tested their resolve. How did these fishermen maintain faith in their craft? And what role did Poseidon's myth play in sustaining their hope amid the sea's endless uncertainty? You stand now in the bustling harbor of Chalcis, 650 BCE, where fishermen unload baskets of glistening fish, their boats bobbing in the tide's gentle sway. Poseidon, the sea's untamed god, has become a symbol of triumph for these coastal communities, his myth transforming their perilous labor into a narrative of endurance. The climax of their story lies in the resilience of fishermen who, through skill and ritual, turned the sea's unpredictability into a source of sustenance and identity for the polis. As you watch a family offer a clay fish to Poseidon's shrine, you see how their daily toil, guided by the god's restless tides, wove a legacy of survival. The resolution of fishing's role came through the stabilization of coastal economies. By 650 BCE, Peleus like Chalcis had developed sophisticated systems for fishing and trade. Archaeological finds from Rhodes show drying racks and salt pits, evidence of large-scale fish preservation for export. Fishermen formed guilds, as recorded in Thasian inscriptions, pooling resources to build sturdier boats or share catches, ensuring no family went hungry. You might imagine a fisherman, his boat repaired with communal funds, offering a net weight to Poseidon in thanks, his success tied to the polis's prosperity. Temples, like those at Saunion, became economic hubs, storing salted fish for trade, their inventories etched on stone to guard against scarcity. The human stories behind these catches reveal profound resilience. A votive tablet from Miletus tells of a fisherman named Nicias who, after surviving a storm, dedicated a bone harpoon to Poseidon, his family's survival a testament to grit. Women played vital roles, salting fish or weaving nets, their labor preserved in the wear of tools found at Aegina. Children, too, contributed, gathering shells for bait, as seen in coastal middens. The myth of Poseidon, with his dual nature of wrath and bounty, inspired these communities to see each haul as a victory over the sea's chaos. Festivals like the Poseidonia, noted in Corinthian records, saw fishermen parading catches to honor the god, reinforcing communal bonds. The legacy of these fishermen endures today. Their cooperative systems foreshadow modern fishing collectives, while their navigation techniques echo in maritime traditions. The resilience of coastal families, facing the sea's unpredictability, mirrors how modern communities adapt to environmental challenges. Poseidon's myth, with its focus on taming the untamable, reminds us that survival often lies in the mundane, mending nets, sharing catches, offering prayers. These fishermen, though ordinary, were heroes of persistence. Their lives are quiet. Epic of survival. As you watch the harbor bustle, a fisherman's child placing a shell at Poseidon's altar, you reflect on the power of these coastal lives. Their work sustained the polis, their rituals tamed the sea's wrath, and their endurance echoed Poseidon's restless tides. But what other unsung labors, hidden in the nets and shrines of history, might reveal the quiet forces that shape our world today?